Okay. आप लोग बोल रहे हो turn on the recording, so let's turn it on. No problem at all. Say it, no problem at all. So let's just wait for a few minutes to see if anybody else wants to join in, and then inshallah ta'ala at sharp 10:30 we'll be starting off. Um, just please note, नहीं pseudocode pro open करने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है. I don't support this pseudocode pro वाली logic. A lot of you a lot of you do use it. Okay, it's really good and everything. Sab ho jayega, Hamza, sab ho jayega, don't worry. But there is a reason why I don't recommend making use of this pseudocode pro, because you need to declare everything, you need to fill it up with values and everything. So that sort of is some extra struggle, which definitely I won't recommend कि आप लोग करें. सही है. A better way will be to making use of AI. AI is the best guide out there. AI को use करो, make use of AI to understand where you're lacking, and everything will be good to go, inshallah, don't worry. So just 2 more minutes to see if anybody else wants to join in, and then हो जाएगा. Sir, मैं past paper practice कर रहा हूँ, syllabus student, तो इस तरह आ जाएगा, बिल्कुल आ जाएगा, inshallah. So do you think NeuroGeek is good for studying? Well, I haven't used it, but definitely, by the way, NeuroGeek was founded by a very good friend of mine. He was sort of a senior, and उसका जो छोटा भाई है वो तो मेरा बहुत अच्छा दोस्त है, but yeah. सर ये जरा हमजा उम्र बता दूंगा ना, बता दूंगा, सब हो जाएगा. हम स्टार्ट ही उधर से करेंगे. Let's start from there. So I'm giving you guys just 4 minutes to ask any random question you might have, because we're going to start off at inshallah 10:32, 10:34 ki taraf, and then at that point I won't be accommodating any more questions. So if there are any questions you might want to ask at this point, to पूछ लो. वरना बाद में फिर I'm going to be ignoring, because I'll be only focusing upon the 15 marker, and I want all of you guys to only give you questions which are related to what we are studying. Sir, how to revise P1? Good question. P1 को revise करने का तरीका यही है. Go through the notes, open up topicals को redo करने की कोशिश करो. होता है नहीं होता, वन उसी में revision हो जाएगी. Only if your concepts are clear. If your concepts are not clear, definitely then go back to revising the concepts. Sir, code efficiency के marks होते नहीं होते. Unless it's a 15 marker, but even though in the 15 marker, if your logic is correct, efficiency doesn't matter. The recording will be available, don't worry. How many marks do we need to get A star and A? Depends upon the threshold, but generally 120 plus is a good margin. Uzaifa Khan, लगता है आपने कीबोर्ड के ऊपर बटन दबाया और एंटर कर रहे हो. Sir, what should I do for paper number 2 practice? How many questions we are going to do? We are just going to be doing 115 marker, understanding how to do it and all that stuff. Sir, if सिर्फ comments लिखिए, no codes, marks मिलेंगे. यार marks आपको comments के मिलेंगे, but definitely if you want to add some comments, we're going to come to that. Good question. Sir, a question है, like when we get the 15, so we got to declare. Don't worry, उसके ऊपर आते हैं. Would you recommend watching lectures for paper number 1 at this point? Depends. अगर आपके concepts are बिल्कुल ही not clear, then in that case, definitely. Otherwise, if your concepts are somewhat clear, better to go with notes. Sir, for the new syllabus that states last feature are used in 15, states that the last features are used. So past paper take only because the pattern would be different. So the new syllabus states that the last 3 chapters are used in 15 markers. 15 markers are just going to be following the same exact format it had been following. So you won't be getting tested upon what we call it logic gates or maybe databases. Don't worry. Say easy scene. Sir, how to do chapter 1? मेरे YouTube channel खोलो, there is an entire playlist uploaded for that. Sir, how to get distinction? Discussed in great detail पिछली class की recording में, but luck, hard work and everything will be fine inshallah. Sir, paper 2 में pseudocode बिल्कुल नहीं आते, क्या करूं? Understand the concepts. अगर concepts clear हो गए and you are still unable to do the practice questions, I would recommend that you opt for our past paper session starting from the 1st of April, because that is going to be a game changer for you all. I'm telling you. I got a top in Pakistan distinction, and I myself will be solving round about 3 years of past papers for you all, inshallah, in those live classes. And you're going to understand why am I solving a question like that? How do you need to solve it the right way? And what is in the examiner mind which allows you to get that A star? So if you opt for all those who have opted for the past paper session, guys, inshallah, you guys are going to have a crazy sort of a session. Inshallah, we will be solving all these crazy 15 markers together, and we won't be just solving them. We will understand why this specific step has been conducted. So for those who are not a part of this group, we're going to share the community group with you all. And I would recommend everyone who is facing problems in paper number 2 or even in paper number 1 to opt for our past paper session. It's going to be a 1.5 months comprehensive session. And inshallah, by the end of that, you will be really, really good to go. So, yeah, notes are good enough. Yeah, all the notes which I have made on my own, those are good to go for your A star. Does absence of indentation result in negative marking? In the 15 marker, yes. In the others, no, but it's still recommended aap karo. Walaikum assalam, Iman. How are you doing? So if I'm O2 student, yeah, it depends. If you want to practice the 15 marker, you can stay, warna koi nahi. Um, is the constant use karte hain, Zapter sab karte hain, don't worry. Sir, what advice would you have for chapter 8 error finding questions? Practice. To be honest, for all this, practice, practice, practice. Sir, chapter 5 say like how questions come. Go to my YouTube channel. There has been an entire video on chapter 5 topical solutions. आप वो देख लो, सब आपका cover हो जाएगा. Annotate diagrams के लिए क्या करें? Again, good question. Annotate diagrams के लिए you should be clear upon the concept so that if a question comes up, you can make some random boxes and explain something using that. So you shouldn't be just writing text. You should take the concept, depict that concept in terms of some shapes, and based upon those shapes, then you could sort of do whatever question you might want to find. But यार क्या यार टोपी पहन लेती हूँ उसके साथ थोड़ा मजा आता है. So all the details for the past paper session will be shared on the form. आप वो लोग fill कर दें and आप लोग को अच्छे से सब कुछ हो जाएगा. सही है. So it's 10:33. Let's start off and सही है. बाकी questions हम साथ साथ करेंगे. I can share the community group with you all. आप लोग बस वहाँ से join in कर देना. After the class, the recording will be shared there. And at the same time, if anybody wants to ask for any details regarding the past paper session, you can ask all those questions. Any other question which you might want to ask, वो बाद में discuss कर लेंगे. The group is there for you. I'm pretty active there, so हो जाएगा. So let's just start off. Let me paste this link for the past paper session. Oh, past paper की copy होगी group कर लेता. But one of the link is for the past paper session and the second one is for the group. Do join them and inshallah good see you. Let's start off. So I'm going to first of all be starting off today's discussion with this really important marking scheme. So we will be solving inshallah ta'ala past paper session. Okay, we will be past paper bolo. We will be solving the specimen paper for the 2023. And let's start off. So assalamu alaikum everybody. I hope you all are doing super well. My name is Maaz Munir. I got a top in Pakistan distinction in computer science. And today this session is going to be a comprehensive session where we will be jumping into the contents of the 15 marker. So the whole main agenda of today's class is to first of all understand what is a 15 marker constituted of, what are the main components an examiner looks for, and all that stuff. So before moving on, before all of you, definitely, where can I open the question? No, I don't know कि ये class कितनी बड़ी जाएगी. But the question is up here. I'm sharing the link with you all. If anybody wants to just open it up, the link has been shared. But first and foremost, a lot of you definitely would at this point be giving their questions to GPT and would be asking them to mark it for you. But the biggest problem is that your GPT never sort of understands, bro, how to mark your question. You know why? Because your GPT was never taught. Perhaps let me take a picture though. We have 98 kiddos. MashaAllah, that's great to know. That's great to know. I hope it's really helpful for all of you. But yeah, let's start off. So the first and foremost thing is that when you look up onto the marking scheme, most of the students are sort of saying, oh, ये तो code इस तरह लिखा हुआ है, I wrote it this way, this means I am not going to be getting marks. But that's not the reality. The agenda for today's class, we will be inshallah ta'ala starting off our whole discussion from the fact of how does an examiner mark your paper. So this marking part is really important. And the best part is that perhaps not the best will have, but the main point is that a lot of you students are not even aware of how to mark your paper. Let's go to the marking table, which isn't this solution up here, but perhaps this. So your 15 marker is basically divided into two parts. Your 15 marker tests your one test AO2 skill and the other tests your AO3 skills. Now, at this point, I know a lot of you might not be aware of what's AO2, what's AO3, but don't worry. I did choose the easiest 15 marker because it's for the fact that a lot of the students are just jumping in, and it's also for the students who are just starting off. We will be learning how to solve a 15 marker, and then definitely we will be doing those complex 15 markers in the past paper sessions if anybody wants to continue with that. But the main agenda today is not to solve a 15 marker. You can get ample amount of solutions online on YouTube or where not. But the main point up here is that you understand how to solve a 15 marker. Say, so not ChatGPT, okay, Hamza, that's another story. But for now, you all need to understand what are AO2, what's AO3. Now, everyone in the chat box, Gemini, GPT, ko baad mein kar lena, abhi class ke upar focus karo. So your 15 marker has been divided under two categories. One is AO2, which is basically assessment objective 2, and the third one is assessment objective 3. Now remember, your assessment objective 2 basically tests
this specific skill where it says that you should be applying the knowledge and understanding of the principles and concepts of computer science to a given context, which apparently means that up here you need to apply your logical programming skills. Now, a lot of you would have this one question in their mind that said, if I write the wrong answer, if I write the wrong code, this means I'm going to get a 0 out of 15. But in reality, that's not how it happens. If you look up onto the marking scheme, you're going to clearly see that up here it's mentioned that you will be getting your marks in basis of AO2 and in terms of AO3. So you're going to be having maximum 9 marks for AO2 and then 6 marks for AO3. Now, what are AO2? What are AO3? That's the important part. Now, AO2 basically tests your aspects related to programming. So all your logical thinking, all your programming code, all your pseudocode, all your if statements, conditional statements, iteration loops, and whatnot. Wherever you have this logical part being tested, that's going to be marked under your AO2 or assessment objective 2. And the best part is that if you write your code perfectly fine, let's say it's 100% working, you will be getting 9 out of 50. So you're just going to get 9 by 15 for writing the correct code. A lot of people are not even aware of this. And I'm directly sharing this from the marking scheme. If you look up here, your examiner is going to be giving you marks based upon these 3 categories. So if you have used a specific range of programming techniques, what do we mean by programming techniques? Programming techniques refers to stuff like loops, let's say some sort of arrays manipulation, let's say some sort of variables being updated, constants being used or whatnot, or maybe even if I might want to add conditional statements. Whenever you make use of all those programming concepts which were being taught to you in chapter number 7, chapter number 8, you will be basically fulfilling this condition, which basically means that if you make use of programming techniques and you sort of meet the entire scenario for whatever the question is, you can see it up here. All criteria stated for the scenario have been covered by the use of the appropriate programming techniques. You will be getting a 7 by 9, which also means that the data structure chosen are appropriate and stored and all blah blah is kubarate. But what do we mean by this first part? If you go to any 15 marker, whenever you're marking a 15 marker, it's really important that at the top, you always read these 5 points. These are the techniques that are required. So people are genuinely just jumping into the code whereas they forget this specific part. So if you look up here, you can clearly see that the technique, exactly, the codes have 9 marks. Nee, comments ke 6 nahi hai. You guys can't hear me? Everybody? Yes, I will be uploading it on YouTube. Don't worry. Guys, can you please let me know? आवाज आ रही? Okay, perfect. आते हैं तुम भाई, सब पे आता हूँ. Don't worry. हमजा उमर सब पे आते हैं. सब डिस्कस होता है. Then don't worry. First of all, you have these 5 or whatever number of techniques in your syllabus. आपने ये करना है. You need to, whenever you solve a 15 marker, you jump onto these techniques and see what are the main coding marks for. So if you look up here, you can clearly see there are going to be marks for calculating the total marks. There are going to be marks for calculating average, selection of grade, outputting the names, and then calculating and storing these details. So if you meet these 5 conditions, no matter from whatever logic you might want to put up, because a lot of students sometimes say, sir, I used this logic, but marking scheme had this logic. Does this mean I won't be getting marks? No. If you are sort of completing these 5 conditions, these are the 5 requirements, the in programming techniques the examiner expects from you. If you complete all of them and you do it using the right programming syntax, you will be getting full marks in this assessment objective 2 category, which means that you will be getting 9 by 9 for this, given that you also make use of the right data structures. But now the question is, what are data structures, right? Data structures means that you are correctly using arrays, you're correctly using variables, you're correctly using constants. So if someone, rather than writing something like this, if I, let's say, want to store the marks of some students, so maybe I do something like marks count, and I might want to put some value inside this. If someone, rather than doing it this way, they mess up the logic and they're doing something like, okay, value, and they do something like this, bro, now this is wrong. Why? Because this does not follow the exact syntax which has been taught to you. Now, if you write the wrong logic, definitely you will be losing marks. But if you make use of this logic, this specific syntax, where you specify the name of the array alongside the proper method taught to you guys back in your classroom, you will be good to go. So can we use equals to sign instead of arrow? No, you cannot. It's important that you use the arrow sign because this equals to usually refers to comparison operator. So it's a total different thing. Now, the point is that if 9 marks are for the logic, for the code, then sir, बाकी 6 marks किसके? We were always wondering कि यार ये तो if I write the whole code correct, only in that case I will be getting perfect 15 by 50. But that's not the case. Now, if you focus up, guys, if you guys want, I can turn off the chat box. अगर आप लोग ने गप्पी लगानी है तो गप्पों के लिए आप ग्रुप में चले जाए. For all those who want to study, वो रह जाए, एंड बाकी जिनने गपशप लगानी है आप लोग लीव कर सकते हैं. अदरवाइज इफ यू डोंट गेट साइलेंट आई विल बी रिमूविंग यू ऑन माय ओन एंड देन अनफॉर्चुनेटली यू विल बी बैंड फ्रॉम ऑल फ्यूचर सेशंस. सही है. सो नाउ द थिंग इज, now when we have the 9 marks for these specific principles and concepts of computer science, तो remaining जो हमारे 6 marks है वो किन चीजों के लिए? So in that case, if you go down, you're going to see that you have the assessment objective 3, and that assessment objective 3 explains where the other 6 marks are going to be. So whenever you solve a 15 markers, it's really important that you look up onto these factors. Your code needs to be fully commented. You need to make use of suitable identifiers with names meaningful to their purpose. Your program needs to be in a logical order. The solution needs to be accurate, and it needs to meet all the requirements given in the question. What does it mean? Now, the thing is, a lot of you have been asking about this comments. It's not like आपने अपने पूरे के पूरे paper को you told to use equals to in pseudocode. That's wrong. You know, according to the examiner requirement, or perhaps according to the pseudocode guide, you can even find this online. If you go to the pseudocode guide, it's basically making use of this arrow, which is basically an assignment operator. Even you will have seen these questions in exam where they ask you explicitly, bro, where are the, in what line do you find an assignment operator? You always should be aware that when you want to assign some value, you need to put this. If you put something like a equals to, this equals to generally refers to a comparison operator. Now, pseudocode does not have a strict syntax, which apparently means that if you even follow your teacher's style, it might be correct. But the thing is that why are you sort of going for something which basically is not according to the examiner's standard? If an examiner says that you need to make use of the arrow sign, why are you even going for the comparison operator or for equals to? You need to make use of equals to when you have something like if grade is equal to A star. In this case, this equal to could be used. Why? Because this equal to at this point is used as a comparison operator. But if you want to assign some value, remember assigning के लिए it's always an arrow, and this arrow is known as assignment operator. So this is a really important point. ये गलती नहीं करना, क्योंकि even if you open up any exam paper, any solution, हर जगह पे arrow ही use होता है, कहीं पे भी आपको equals to नहीं मिलता. सही है? So now coming to the main point, अगर आप यहाँ पे इसके ऊपर focus करो. Acha, guys, just a minute. What happens is you have two skills the examiner is sort of testing in the 15 marker. One skill is assignment objective number 2, whereas the second skill is assignment objective number 3. Assignment objective number 2 is that specific part of your coding where they ask you for skills related to coding, or maybe logical thinking, or logical solutions, or anything related to pseudocode. Whereas assignment objective 3 is that skill where examiner, or perhaps that part where an examiner is now thinking that, okay, the bro wrote the code, but now let's see whether the code makes any sense, whether that code is explained, whether that code follows a specific flow, or whether it's easy to read or not. So as a programmer, it's important to understand that your code is not only correct, logical, and follows the proper method, but at the same time, it's easy to understand, it is explained, and if at any point a person who is not somewhere who wrote the code and they open up that specific code, they should be able to understand it. So for that reason, what an examiner did was they divided the 15 marks into two categories. They were like, wherever you're going to be writing the coding part, the logical part, for that we will be giving you 9 marks. Whereas wherever you need to explain the code, or maybe follow a specific logic that explains what's happening inside the code, for that we will be specifying 6 marks. So if you focus up on here, you're going to see that your code requires 9 marks for logic, which will be only correct if you follow all the programming techniques asked in the question, and you follow the exact implementation which have been taught to you previously in those chapter number 7, chapter number 8. Whereas if you go down to the AO3, if you want to see that how can I grab 15 by 15, for that it's important that you also follow this part. A lot of students, they only focus upon this part. They're like, okay, if my code is correct, I would be good to go. But it's really important that you also follow upon this part, which is how can your code make sense? How does your code how is your code easy to read? How does it follow a specific flow? And for that, we have these 6 points. Firstly, your program needs to be fully commented. So a lot of you have this one question, sir, comment kab karna hai, comment kab karna hai, comment kab karna hai. Whenever you implement a specific technique, comment dalo. So like I say that, okay, you make use of a for statement, add a comment next to it and say for loop used for this specific thing. Let's say you make use of a repeat loop, comment repeat loop used for this thing. You might want to make use of an if statement dal diya, and you write if or conditional statement used to check this condition. You declared something, the comment sign declaring variables. So after every 4 to 5 lines, you're going to see that apparently after every 4 to 5 lines, you will be easily able to understand that, okay, अब मैंने एक chunk of code लिख दिया, let me add a comment onto it. So कब comment डालना है? Maybe after every 4 or 5 lines, whenever something new happens, you made use of a conditional statement, आपने एक comment डाल दिया. You made use of a specific technique, आपने comment डाल दिया. First point. Secondly, your examiner will be giving you marks based upon the fact that how did you identify your variables, arrays, and constants, which basically means that in your 15 markers, definitely at some points you might be required to create a variable. Let's say I want to store how many students passed the computer science subject. So I can create this variable pass count. Now, definitely, a lot of you might not even have read the question at this point, right? So because you haven't read the question, if you just hear this word pass count, you would be pretty much very clear that this is going to store number of pass students, right? It's pretty much evident from the name of the variable. But if I specify the name of the variable to be something like X, are you sure what this X is going to be storing? No, right? So in a lot of cases, when we are in a hurry, and for those who might be doing it in Python, you might do something like, okay, X, or I might create a variable with the name of Y, or maybe X, Y, Z. So bro, if you create such variables, these are not meaningful names for it. A meaningful identifier means that whenever you have an array, whenever you have a counter, whenever you have a constant or maybe an array, you give it a name which basically explains what it is going to store. And if you don't do that, you're going to lose marks for that. And it's stated up here. So this means that if you don't even write the logic of the code the right way, but your code has been commented fully and your identifiers are still the right with the proper name, and your program is somewhat following the logical order, you can still grab these 6 marks. And that is the reason why I always emphasize that it's not, guys, आप लोग अगर chat box में बातें कर रहे हो तो फिर आप लोग दूसरे उसमें चले जाओ ना ग्रुप में. Just give me a minute, I know how to do this. Okay, much better now, I guess. अब आप लोग क्लास के ऊपर फोकस कर सकोगे. But now the point here to note is that आप लोग जब भी प्रोग्राम को, अभी जिसने लीव करना है क्योंकि उन्होंने गपशप लगानी है, आप लोग यहाँ लीव कर लो. It would be appreciated so that the one who needs to study, आप लोग क्लास पे फोकस कर सको. So point number 1 is that whenever you are focusing upon a 15 marker, you always have marks for non-coding part. Non-coding part. People always think that, okay, if I do the coding part, I'm going to be cooked. But no, you have proper 6 marks just for non-coding. And what are those 6 marks for? Firstly, comments. Now there is no exact margin ki comments ke kitte marks honge, whether it's 1, 2, 3 or 4. It's up to the examiner's discussion. But the main point up here to note is that if your program meets all these 6 categories, they will be either giving you 5 or 6. So rather than specifying the marks for each of the section, what they did was they sort of created 3 categories. And the highest category says that your code needs to be fully commented, which I said that if you implement a specific programming technique, you sort of just add a comment explaining what's happening inside. Like for instance, if I open up this code, you can say that up here in the solution, they could sort of see that it basically initialized something, right? So they added a comment that you are now initializing. Then it was like, okay, it's making use of iteration, selection, totaling, and counting. And so it created a comment and explained that after this, I'm going to implement this logic. And just like that, after every specific technique being used, it is sort of explaining what happened. Just like that, you will, if your code is in a logical order, there will be marks for it. For instance, what do I mean by this? So sometimes when you're sort of solving a 15 marker, the big problem that arises is that you do a specific thing and then you like realize, oh, ये तो भूल ही गया था, ये तो मैंने ये चीज भी करनी थी. And at that point, you are like, okay, I'm cooked. So if you have a space for your recovery, फिर तो good to go है. But if you missed an important point and you sort of do that at the end, then that means your program is not in a logical order and you will be losing marks for that too. So whenever you're writing code, it's not about just spamming pseudocode, it's also about using the right identifiers, using the right commenting techniques, and ensuring that everything is being done in the logical orders alongside the correct implementation of the techniques that are being stated up here. And a lot of students also have this one question, sir, अगर हमसे थोड़ी बहुत गलती हो जाए तो क्या does this mean we won't be getting 15 on 15? No. See, the examiner themselves said that your solution needs to be accurate, but if there are any sort of minor syntax errors, तो ignore हो जाएंगे. So for instance, if someone, let's say, missed and while, so if someone missed and while making use of while loop, so that could be counted as a minor syntax error. वो miss हो जाएगा if your other part of the code is 100% correct. So you don't need to sort of think about all these smaller parts. बस आपका main focus इसके ऊपर होना चाहिए that how should I need to basically ensure that my code is being fully commented, my code is in the right order, and how my code is at the same time following an exact proper method of the techniques stated in a specific marking scheme. The purpose of introducing this to you all was so that you can understand that it's not only about writing the code, making use of the correct loops, making use of the correct arrays, but at the same time ensuring that whatever variables, whatever arrays, whatever stuff you might be making use of, unke proper suitable names hone chahiye, and that your code is fully identified. Because if you don't include this, you will be losing marks. Sahi hai? What is the optimal time for a 15 marker? 1 hour. Yes. So do you guys have any questions about this? Any good sort of question? Yeah, should we move on to the paper? This is really important. अगर किसी को कोई question अभी है तो जल्दी पूछ लो. I'm just going to be answering those अगर कोई है. So 45 minutes in the rest. So timings की बात अगर की जाए, you have 1 hour 45 minutes for your paper number 2. What you need to do is you need to divide this into 1 hour and you need to divide this into 45 minutes. Now this 45 minutes will be sort of used for the first 60 marks. And if you practice the first 60 marks the right way, you easily doable. And then this 1 hour will be left for the 15 markers. Why? Because this 15 marker requires breaking the concept and at the same time solving and thinking and doing all that stuff. Same. How to start a comments? You add just 2 sessions. Same. सर अगर कोड गलत है कमेंट ठीक है तो मार्क्स मिलेंगे. योर कमेंट शुड बी एक्सप्लेनिंग द कोड. सो अपेरेंटली अगर आपने कमेंट सही किया हो फॉर गलत कोड, मतलब आपने गलत कोड है लेकिन उसका कमेंट सही किया हो, तो आपको कमेंट के मार्क्स मिलेंगे लेकिन आपको कोड के मार्क्स नहीं मिलेंगे, व्हिच मींस कि आपके मार्क्स AO2 में कट होंगे, बट बिकॉज आपने कमेंट सही किया तो आपको AO3 के मार्क्स फिर भी मिलेंगे. सर शुड बी नॉट ऐड द कोड एट द एंड, जिस तरह कोड या कमेंट की बात कर सकते हैं. So sir, AO2 is for syntax and AO3 for the AO2 is for syntax and content of code. AO3 is for the representation of the code. कि बहुत proper comments हो, explained code हो. सही. Alright, so now let's move on. सही है, काफी आप लोगों ने वो कर दिए. अभी हम सारा ये इसी में करेंगे तो आप लोग को अच्छे से समझ आ जाएगी. If there are any other questions, कमेंट साथ साथ वो हम सब कर लेंगे, सब डिस्कस करेंगे. नहीं पेंसिल के साथ कभी नहीं करना, पेंसिल के साथ मार्क्स नहीं मिलेंगे. इट्स अप टू द एग्जामिनर कि वो कि कुछ केसेस में आई हैव सीन स्टूडेंट्स गेटिंग मार्क्स बट इन मोस्ट केसेस दे हैवंट. सो वी वोंट बी टेकिंग रिस्क एट ऑल. सो लेट्स गेट टू द क्वेश्चन. We will be inshallah ta'ala solving this exam paper question today. It's from your specimen paper 2023, paper number 2A. It's a relatively very easy sort of a 15 marker, but the purpose of selecting this 15 marker was so that you guys get familiar with it and so that you guys can understand how to solve a 15 marker the right way. So this is from the 2023 specimen paper. So first of all, we will be reading the question. So when you get to the 15 marker on your exam paper, आपने करना किस तरह, आपने कभी भी 15 marker पहले नहीं करना. Point number 1. You start off from question number 1 and in the first 45 minutes आपने बाकी सारा पेपर खत्म करना. Then you get to the 15 marker part. And now when you open up that 15 marker, you don't need to be like, okay bro, let me just grab my pen and blah 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 start. You don't need to start immediately. First and foremost thing, read the question आराम से with great focus. 15 marker के अंदर for anyone who reads the question quickly, sorry to say but you're already 50% cooked. But अब आपने अपने आप को prevent कैसे करना है? Read the question, take a pen or a pencil, and whatever important variable, constant or array name you see, underline it. So let's see. The question says there's a one-dimensional 1D array with the name of student name. So I'm going to just underline it like this, which contains the names of students in a class. So, okay, I get to know that there is an array with the name of student names, which has the name. So I'm going to be creating a small diagram for me so that I can sort of assume, okay, कि यहाँ पे ये हो रहा है. So there is this array, which is 1D. It has the name student name. So मैं इस तरह एक pencil के साथ या pen के साथ this is something you need to do. I did it and it was really helpful. And आपने इस तरह वैसे ही assume कर देना है this is an array which is going to have names inside it. So I might say that okay, namaz aa gaya and blah blah blah. बस इस तरह कर दो so that you are aware that okay, it's going to be storing names. Then there's a two-dimensional array with the name of student mark. And this two-dimensional array now stores the marks for each subject for each student. And then it says that the position of each student's data in the two array is the same. For example, the student in position 10 in student name and student mark is the same, which basically means that it is telling me that, bro, there is a two-dimensional array with the name of student marks, which sort of is following this model. यार आपके पास दो उसके अंदर एक table है which sort of has two columns inside them, and definitely because it indicated that one column is going to store the marks of the student for each subject. So contains the marks for each subject. Okay, for each subject, which means that because it's going to store the marks for each subject. So if I say that I scored 65 in computer science, अगले student ने score किया let's say 70 in English. So where will that be stored? So it apparently tells me that it is a two-dimensional array where in each field or each column I'll be storing the marks for one student. अब मुझे ये कैसे पता लगेगा? आपने क्वेश्चन को गौर से पढ़ना है. आप क्वेश्चन को देखो. क्वेश्चन ये बोल रहा है कि यार आपने एक टू डायमेंशनल एरे बनाना है. सो just wonder you have a two-dimensional array, and that two-dimensional array is storing marks for each subject. So if I ask you to create a table for a students who might have 10 subjects and you want to store the marks for all of those 10 students, आप कैसे एक table बनाओगे? You will be definitely creating it something like this. You might be like, okay, up here we might write the name of the student, and then up here chemistry, then up here CS, then physics, and blah blah blah. We always do it this way, right? But यहाँ पे we might need to store the name of the student, name, yeah, maybe I can say something like ID of the student or whatsoever. So by making this scenario in your brain and by drawing this small diagram on a pencil, it's pretty much very easy to depict this model in terms of pseudocode. But if you directly jump on to writing the code and you don't make something like this, you would be like, okay, bro, wait, अब मैंने एक का करना है, दो का करना है, तीन का करना है, किस तरह करना है? Because they never explain that part to you, that whether at position number 1 it's storing this, or whether it's at position number 2 it's storing that. So for that reason, first and foremost thing, whenever you start reading, make a small diagram for whatever you're sort of implementing. Because if you don't do that, in that case you sort of are cooked. So अब जब आपने ये कर लिया, अब क्या करना है? Continue with the question. It says that there is a variable class size which contains the number of students in the class. Okay, I'm pretty clear that now wherever in the code I want to access how many students are in the class, I'll be always referring to the variable with the name of class size. Just like that, the variable subject number contains the number of subject study. Okay, pretty much evident that wherever I might want to access the number of subjects, that let's say I have 8 subjects, 10 subjects, 12 subjects, I don't know how many, but whatever the number of subjects are, they will be stored in this variable. Important point number 2. And finally, it says that all students study the same number of subjects, which is again a clear indicator to me that I don't need to worry about this aspect of what if one student has 10 subjects, the other has 8. Like आप लोग में से काफी हो कि होंगे 10 subjects, किसी के 8 होंगे, किसी के 9 होंगे, किसी के 11, 12 or maybe even more. So for that reason, the examiner themselves said that, okay, bro, number of subjects same hai sabke liye. Now they say that the varies and the variables have already been set up and data is stored, which apparently means that no need to initialize. So because they are sort of already set up, this means unke andar pehle se values hai and I no need to initialize it. So I don't need to do something like, okay, I need to input values for the student marks and blah blah blah. It's sort of a table has been created, an array has been created which already has the marks for the entire set of students. And now it says that students are awarded a grade based on their average mark. And what are those marks category? Firstly, if you have scored greater than or equal to 70, which basically means that in terms of pseudocode, this would be something like what? Greater than, equal to 70. Then you will be getting the grade with the name of distinction. If you scored greater than 55, greater than and equal to 55, but less than 70, you'll be getting merit. If you scored greater than 40, but less than 55, you'll be just passing. But if you score less than 40, you're failed. And now this point explains what are the requirements. So if you see, these four requirements are basically what comes under assessment objective number 2. So if you completely meet all these four conditions and requirements, you will get a perfect 9 by 9 in AO2. But then definitely this means that, bro, where will the other 6 marks go? They go into the AO3 part. So यहाँ पे नहीं लिखा. But now you all are aware, because you read the marking scheme, that the other 3 marks are going to be for the comments, for any identifier which you might create, वो meaningful होना चाहिए, meaningful identifier. And then definitely when you were writing the code, that code needs to be in a logical order. If it's not, then you sort of are missing out. So you sort of can divide these two marks in each of them, but it's not necessary कि आपके 2 marks इसके लिए, 2 इसके लिए, 2 इसके लिए. But altogether, if you implement all of them in the right way, you will get perfect 6 by 6 for this. And if you meet these four conditions, you're going to get perfect 9 by 9 for this. So now, before jumping onto the code, point number 1, आपने यहाँ पे रुक के देखना है, कोई comment तो नहीं है. So you must use pseudocode or program and add comments. Okay, ये तो समझ आ गई. Point number, you do not need to initialize the data in the array. Now, in this question, they did not mention that I'm not required to sort of, what do we call it, declare an array or maybe declare a variable, which means that because they did not say I do not need to declare an array, if I want to make use of a variable of a specific constant or something, I have to declare it at any cost. But in a lot of recent exam papers, you would have noted that when you open up that exam paper, उसके end में ये लिखा होता है, you are not required to declare the array. You are not required to declare or initialize any sort of variables. So जब exam question clearly mention करता है that you are not required to declare any array, constants or variable which you might be using, फिर आपने नहीं करना. But if a question like this comes up where they do not specify कि आपने करना है या नहीं करना, in that case, yes, you are required to declare whatever variable you might be making use of. So if I look up here, अब इस तरह नहीं कि मैंने पेन के साथ करना है. पहली बात, you don't have a lot of time, so in most cases students will be starting off with solving it using their pencils, but at the end आप आओगे and you will be like, okay bro, ये तो time ही रह गया and I cannot do it using my pen, and in that case you will be done. So it doesn't initialize mean giving value, so we have to declare it. Now the thing is, in this case it's only saying कि आपने array को initialize नहीं करना, which also means that you also don't need to declare it. Declare भी नहीं करना array को. But if let's say I want to create a different variable, a different constant, maybe if you see, it says that you need to calculate and store the output, the number of distinctions, merit, passes and fails. So this means हमने इन सबको भी तो कहीं store करना है ना. So उस सब के लिए हमने अलग-अलग variables, constants और वो use करने होंगे. So अब वो कब करेंगे? Sir, can you explain that? वो आते उस पे आते हो, फिर से भी आते हो. सही है? So अब उसको करने का तरीका क्या है? First and foremost thing, you need to go to this entire requirement. Let's read it together. So you need to calculate the combined total marks for each subjects for all their subjects. Okay, point number 1, I need to calculate the total marks. So tip number 1, whenever you're solving a 15 marker, go to some place and just list down ki, yo, what variables or constants do I need to create? So I need to store the total marks for all the students. This means I need to create a sort of data container which can store this total marks for all of the students. Now, in most of the cases, what the teachers will be doing is, what the students will be doing is, the students in this case will be directly storing the marks as in, and they will be like, okay, let's create a variable and that variable will be storing the marks. But we have to store it for each of the students. Is point ko zehn mein rakhte hue, is it going to make a difference? Let's see. Aage dekhte jayenge. Then it says that I need to calculate the average mark for each student. Okay, again, I need to store the average somewhere too. Point number 2. Then continue. It says that you need to output the name, combined total mark, average mark, grade awarded. Okay. And then, of course, I need to find the number of distinctions, the number of merits, number of passes, and number of fails. So this means I need to find the distinction number, how many students got distinction. I need to see how many students got merit. I need to see how many students passed. And finally, how many students failed. So definitely, if I have to store the values for these 6 aspects or these 6 storage containers, we need to declare something. So now the question does not ask you to declare the array in this case. It says that if you want to create a specific variable, a specific sort of container, an array or constant whatsoever, if you want to declare something, bro, but that is something which has not been stated in the question, you need to declare it up here in the exam paper. So for all these variables or arrays or these constants which we will be creating today inshallah in our class, उन सबको हमने डिक्लेयर करना है. Why? क्योंकि एग्जामिनर ने यहाँ पे ये नहीं लिखा कि हमने इसको नहीं करना. सही है. So now coming to important point, अब इसको हमने करना कैसे? So if you first of all go up and आप ऊपर जाओगे, so you're going to see that the question, we had a question कि यार मुझे ये पोजीशन की बात समझ नहीं है. So if I have to just quickly give a recap, आपने क्या करना है, आपने क्वेश्चन को गौर से 2 दफा पढ़ना है, मस्त 2 दफा पढ़ना है, आपने इतना स्टार्ट नहीं करना. हमने देख लिया that there is an array जिसका नाम है student name and that stores the names of the student, which means कि यार अगर आपका एक array है 1D array, this is a 1D array which is basically storing the marks, names of the student, then definitely हमारे एक दूसरा एरे भी है जिसका नाम है स्टूडेंट मार्क्स जो कि 2 डायमेंशनल है एंड वो स्टोर कर रहा है मार्क्स फॉर ईच सब्जेक्ट. नाउ हमें ये तो नहीं पता कि एक बच्चे के कितने सब्जेक्ट है, वो तो वेरिएबल सब्जेक्ट नंबर के अंदर है कि मे बी स्टूडेंट माइट हैव 4, 5 और जितने भी सब्जेक्ट्स हैं, बट देयर इज अ 2 डायमेंशनल एरे एंड अ 2 डायमेंशनल एरे इज गोइंग टू बी स्टोरिंग मार्क्स फॉर ईच स्टूडेंट. Now, the first column of whenever you have a 2D array, in most cases, that 2D array's first column is going to be something like ID, name, something जो कि आपको उस student का बताता है, क्योंकि this is student number Mars, or this is let's say student number 2, student number 3, student number 4, and blah blah blah. Whereas आपके subsequent जितने भी columns हैं, all those columns are basically going to be storing the values of the specific marks a student might have obtained. So let's say एक स्टूडेंट के सब्जेक्ट काउंट नंबर 5 हो, सो आई कैन से सब्जेक्ट नंबर 1 के मार्क्स यहाँ पे आएंगे, सब्जेक्ट नंबर 2 के मार्क्स यहाँ पे आएंगे, सब्जेक्ट नंबर 3 के मार्क्स यहाँ आएंगे, 4 के यहाँ आएंगे एंड 5 के यहाँ आएंगे. एंड अपेरेंटली दिस इज गोइंग टू कंटिन्यू कि जितने भी सब्जेक्ट नंबर है. सो योर 15 मार्कर विल नेवर बी गिविंग यू वैल्यूज. सही है. 15 markers आपको कभी values नहीं देगा. So 15 markers will always be giving you variables. They will always be giving you something जिसको आपने use करना है for general purpose. अब वो general purpose use कैसे होगा? Now let's start off with it. Now सबसे पहले sir, after the reading the question or when I begin to write, I forget what the question is, what to do. आते हैं उसी के ऊपर आते हैं. So आपने directly start नहीं होना. First of all, at this point you need to take your pencil. So जो मैं बोलूं कि you need to take out 1 hour for this, the purpose of that is कि अब आपने एक small model आपने बनाना है अपने ज़हन में. So at any end you need to see like okay, I need to calculate the combined total marks for each student. So each student के लिए if I want to store the marks of all students, let's say I have 50 students in a class. Let's assume I have 50 students in a class and I want to do something that's calculating total marks for all 50 of them. तो ये मैं कैसे स्टोर कर सकता हूँ? Like how can I store the marks of all 50 students at once? One way is definitely I do total and I can do something like STU1, which would be like total for student 1. The other could be total STU2, which can store the marks of student number 2 and so on. But that's pretty much very, very inefficient. Why will I be creating 50 different variables? Whereas the second way could be, we even studied this back in chapter 8, that whenever I want to store a lot of data in a single container, I am like, okay, why not create an 1D array that stores the marks of the students? So I can say, okay, create a 1D array which will be storing the marks of all the students. So okay, एक तो मुझे ये clear हो गया, I need to create a 1D array which will be storing the marks of all the students. Just like that, the second point says you need to calculate the marks for each student. Now the problem is that if I calculate the average marks for student number 1, I can only store the value of student number 1 inside it. So like let's say student number 1 got 60, but I now also want to store the value of average marks for student number 2, which might have scored 52. तो ये तो नहीं हो सकता, because if I replace this 52 with, if I replace this 60 with 52, this 60 vanishes. So if I want to implement a logic or model which stores the values of all the students, again, this is a clear hint that I will be creating an array which will be storing the marks for all the students. So I can say average marks. And this is again 1D array, which will be storing the marks of all the students. Pretty much clear. Then it says that I need to output number of distinction, merits, passes, and fails, which means that I need to define some specific criteria for the program. Okay, bro, if my marks are greater than 70, it's a distinction. If my marks are between 55 and 70, it's a merit. If it's greater than 40, less than 55, it's a pass. And if it's less than 40, in that case, It's just going to be a fail. So अब इस केस के अंदर मैंने क्या लॉजिक अप्लाई करनी है? So अब मैंने पेंसिल उठाना है, मैंने करना ये क्या है? Yes, the lecture will be uploaded on YouTube. You can go if you have a mock tomorrow and can watch the recording later on. Easy सी है, कोई नहीं. And now अब इसको मैंने करना क्या है? So first of all, whenever I create a model like this, it's pretty much आधे program मेरा solve हो गया है. It's telling me that there is this array जिसके अंदर नाम stored है मेरा. So I have position number 1, and on position number 1 I have, let's say, mass stored. So now if I go to my 2D array, वहां पे भी position number 1 पे जो details हैं वो मेरी ही stored होगी. कहां से मुझे पता लगे? You go and your question clearly says that the position of each student's data in the two arrays is the same, which means that, for example, the student in position number 10 in student name and student mark is the same, which apparently means that if there is a position number 10 जहाँ पे, let's say, मैं बोलूँ हैदर का नाम store है, so position number 10 in the 2D array, let's say this is, let's say, position number 10, the marks stored up here 25, 30, 52, 45, ये सारे भी हैदर के ही हैं. So when I want to access the name, I will be accessing it using what? If I want to access the name, I'll be using the name student name array, student name array. And if I want to access their marks, तो marks को access करने के लिए I will be using the student mark array. But now a question will be, sir, मुझे तो ये पता ही नहीं है कि अब मैं ये कैसे करूंगा? क्लास में कितने स्टूडेंट्स आ रहे? 10 स्टूडेंट्स, 20 स्टूडेंट्स, 30 स्टूडेंट्स, 40 स्टूडेंट्स, 50 स्टूडेंट्स. बट अब आपने टेंशन नहीं लेनी. आपने क्या करना है? You need to see that your question clearly states that there will be a variable with the name of class size, which will be storing the number of students, which means that wherever I will be making use of a for loop, wherever I might be making use of some count variable, I will always take it from 1 to the value of class size. जैसे हम करते हैं ना, so that there are, let's say, 10 students, so we implement this logic for count 1 to 10, right? We do it this way. And now if I'm not sure how many students, I'll be like, okay, go till the maximum amount of students, which would be what? For count 1 to class size. 1 to class size. And आप ये करोगे and boom, you will be already done with half of the work. So आपने इस तरीके से करना है, and जहां भी आप 15 marker solve करेंगे, listen up, wherever you have a 15 marker, आपके 15 marker में हमेशा इस तरह के variable values होंगे. वरना अगर आप variables को नहीं यूज करोगे, in that case आप शॉक में होगे. यू विल बी एट अ स्टेज, यू विल बी लाइक, ओके, मुझे समझ नहीं आ रही कि मैं 10 करूं, अप टू 20 करूं, 30 करूं, 40 करूं, 50 करूं. सो रिमेंबर, रीडिंग द क्वेश्चन इज रियली इंपॉर्टेंट. Otherwise, at the mid of the code, you will be shocked. Now let's solve it. ये solve कैसे होगा? So definitely, if I have to solve this question, first and foremost thing is, I'll be basically declaring some values. So a best part is that I need to specify these distinctions. I need to specify when I will be getting a distinction, when I will be getting merit, pass, and fail. So what I can do is, why not create constants for them? So like if the score is, when I say that if any marks are greater than distinction, this distinction is automatically declared something as 70. So अगर मैं इस तरीके से constant declare कर दूं that distinction has the value 70, merit has the value 55, pass has the value 40, it's going to make everything very easy for me. अब मैं करूंगा कैसे? Pretty easy. I'm going to go down. Let's erase all this. And we first of all, because I don't need to basically declare any array or any initializing part, मैं सिर्फ direct start off होगा with declaring everything that's there in my program. So I'll be like, okay, declare, or perhaps इस केस में तो मैंने constant बनाना है ना, तो because we need to create a constant, so follow the constants syntax. क्या होता है? You just write the keyword constant, and let's say I assume that I want to create a constant with the name of distinction, and I give it the value 70. So constant distinction, and that constant distinction will be having the value 70. Remember, whenever you want to make use of a constant and you want to assign a value to a constant, you make use of equals to. But when you have a variable and you want to assign a value to a variable, you make use of a assignment operator. For a constant, you always make use of equals to. Just like that, I'll be also creating a constant for the other part. So I'll be like, okay, constant for merit. And what's the constant going to be? It's going to be that whenever your value is greater than 55, but it's less than the distinction value, then in that case, it's going to be a merit. So 55 kar dete. It's like sort of setting a specific value. You're sort of setting a specific threshold. Ab, अच्छा guys, एक second मुझे देना. सर एक सेकंड सर. यार आप लोग काफी
guys, I might be closing the chat box in that case, because what I want you all to do is focus either, या फिर I will be turning off the chat box because it's sort of making disruptions. So अगर आप लोग ने गपशप लगानी है तो ऐसे कर लेते हैं, क्लास एंड हो जाए, फिर मैं भी आप लोग के साथ गपशप लगाऊंगा, फिर सब हो जाएगा. सही है? Hamza and anyone else, whoever it is, I'm sort of just then going to be turning off the chat box. And अगर कोई क्वेश्चन हुआ in that case तो फिर आप लोग अपना ही नुकसान करोगे, आप लोग को ही मसला हो जाएगा. सही है? So what's the difference when we use variable or constant? आप variables के अंदर value later on change नहीं कर सकते, because definitely I don't want to change the value of distinction. मुझे पता है कि distinction की value is going to stay the same as 70. So इस वजह से आपका वो कभी चेंज ही नहीं होगा. जब हम कोई चेंज ही नहीं करना चाहते तो इस वजह से why not declare them as constant? आप उसको वेरिएबल भी कर सकते हैं, but it's better that if let's say something is sort of not being changed, if something stays the same. In this case, if you focus, the question always says that your value for distinction is going to stay the same as 70. So if something stays the same, अब इसको मैं variable भी बना सकता था. Maybe I create a variable distinction as integer which can have the value 70 inside it. But now this is where you get the marks for assignment objective number 3. You made a decision which was like, okay, because this value is going to stay the same, in that case, it's going to be fixed 70. So we don't need assignment arrow when declaring a constant. No, you don't need an arrow when declaring a constant. You only need an arrow when you're assigning values to variables. सही है? अच्छा जी, ऐसी बात है. So let's just remove these two people. Just let me tell. Just give me a minute, guys. मैं सबको सेट करता हूँ. सबको सेट कर. Done. And आप लोग को खुद ही बड़ा मसला हो रहा है ना. अब इसके बाद जो भी करेगा ना, they will be immediately blocked from the call. Let me turn off. And after this point, if anybody leaves the call, they won't be allowed to join in. Again, important point. If anybody leaves, you won't be allowed to join in. I have turned off the arrival OB invitation. See? So, yeah. अब अगर किसी ने बात की, वो अभी फौरन हट जाएगा. If you know someone, तो कोई अभी गपशप की जगह नहीं है. Focus upon the class, everybody. Otherwise, I don't want to take this free class. मैंने अपने भी काफी काम करने हैं, and फिर आप लोग का मसला हो जाएगा. ओके, सो अभी से आने लग गया एडमिट वन गेस्ट, कोई एडमिट और नहीं होगा. सो कोई नहीं, महविश, इफ यू वांट टू, ओके वी हैव अनस, सो ये तो अपने स्टूडेंट है. महविश, इफ यू वांट टू जॉइन इन, मैं आपका एक्सेप्ट कर दूंगा इजी सी ने, कोई मसले की बात नहीं. ओके, सो नाउ ओनली सॉलिड अच्छे क्वेश्चंस. अब हमने आराम से पढ़ना है. सही है, कोई मसले की बात नहीं है. ओके ओके जोहा, इजी सी है. मॉक है मेरे पास होने के लिए 15 मार्क्स है. मुझे क्या पता, अब आप आराम से करो. सही है. नहीं, छोड़ो मत, अभी आप यहाँ से वो करो, आपको समझ आ जाएगा. सो बिकॉज द क्वेश्चन सेज दैट आपकी वैल्यू कभी चेंज नहीं होगी. डिस्टिंक्शन की वैल्यू इज ऑलवेज गोना स्टे 70. मेरिट की वैल्यू इज ऑलवेज गोना बी 55 और अबव टिल डिस्टिंक्शन वैल्यू. पास की वैल्यू इज ऑलवेज गोना स्टे 40. व्हेनेवर इन अ 15 मार्कर, व्हेनेवर इन अ 15 मार्कर, जब आपकी वैल्यू कभी कोई चेंज नहीं होती, when your value is not being changed and it stays the same, it's important that you declare that to be a constant. Now this is what examiner is testing you upon. अब मुझे एक बात बताओ, ये जो distinction grade होगा, the criteria for distinction, will that be ever changing? No, right? It's going to stay the same. Because it's going to stay the same, we're always going to be saving it as a constant. So easy करते हो. So do we have to declare all the variables at the start of the program? मतलब जो loops में use होने हैं वो भी start में ही करने. बता दो, अभी हम जब प्रोग्राम करेंगे उसी के साथ साथ करेंगे, बट इट्स नॉट नेसेसरी कि आप सब ऊपर करो. बट जो हमने फॉरन यूज करने हैं, लाइक इन दिस केस व्हेन यू गिव द क्वेश्चन अ गिव रीड, आपको पता लग जाएगा दैट दीज आर द 6 वेरिएबल्स व्हिच आई नीड टू इमीडिएटली यूज, लाइक आई नीड टू डिक्लेयर एट एनी कॉस्ट. सो एनीथिंग व्हिच इज सॉर्ट ऑफ समथिंग व्हिच यू नीड टू डिक्लेयर एट एनी पॉइंट, उसको आपने इस नाम के साथ फॉरन ही डिक्लेयर करने हैं. आप बाद में भी कर सकते हो. इट्स नॉट नेसेसरी दैट यू डू देम राइट नाउ, बट इट्स बेटर टू डू इट राइट नाउ, क्योंकि बाद में जब आप डिक्लेयर करोगे, it's just going to be making the code illogical. But if you see, हमने अभी मार्किंग स्कीम में क्या पढ़ा है, that your code needs to follow a logical order. So in that case, हमजा से perfect point बिल्कुल उसी के ऊपर में आ रहा था, that whenever you are not sure कि मैंने अभी कितना डिक्लेयर आगे करना है, you always leave empty lines up here. So for instance, अब मैंने क्या किया, मैंने ऊपर 2 लाइंस छोड़ दी. अब अगर बाद में मुझे कोई डिक्लेयर या कुछ करना पड़ा, आई एम गोना डिक्लेयर देम अप हियर. I leave these two lines and I start from the third line. And now let's say I want to declare the third one as something like constant pass. So constant pass was, let's say, 40, and definitely fail ka to koi nahi. If it's less than pass, so it's fail. And then I might want to create these variables. अब इसको मैं कैसे करूंगा? Let's declare them. So let's say I want to create average mark, total mark array. So I would be like, okay, declare an array with the name of total marks. And we know the syntax, right? Okay, koi aa raha hai, let me see. Okay, you all are sort of joining in again and again, but chalo, kar lete hain, easy hai, admit all. But this is it. इसके बाद नहीं होगा. So declare marks, which is going to be what? It's the name of an array. So I need to follow the exact order, which would be adding a colon, writing the keyword array, and specifying the limit. Now, if you remember, I even stated this in the last class that if I, in this case, do not know क्लास में कितने स्टूडेंट्स हैं, सो एक तरीका जो कुछ लोग के जहन में होता है दैट आई विल राइट स्टूडेंट और लाइक क्लास साइज अप हियर, वो गलत है. Don't write class size up here. Whenever you're not sure how big an array will be, how large an array will be, वो कितना जाएगा, so I will be writing some random large number like 100. So I'll be like, okay, create an array of 1 to 100 elements of the data type because it's going to store the marks of integer. And just like that, if I, let's say, want to create it for the average, the question up here, you need to see ये average integer होगा, what data type will it be? So if you see, this average is basically for all the subjects, but it's rounded to the nearest whole number, which is a hint to me that, okay, bro, this is going to be integer. Because definitely average could be in decimal points too. So अब जब मुझे ये नहीं पता कि यार मैं decimal points में करूँ, कब करूँ, तो उस point of view के साथ एक सेकंड, कोई इधर उधर की बात नहीं हो रही ना, चलो गुड सीन है. सो जब मुझे पता है कि आई वांट टू क्रिएट अ वेरिएबल और एन एरे व्हिच इज गोइंग टू बी स्टोरिंग होल नंबर्स, सो हमें यहाँ पे क्लियर हिंट मिल गया दैट इफ आई नाउ वांट टू क्रिएट, गाइस अभी आप लोग ना अपने क्वेश्चंस रोक दो, आई एम गोना आस्क एट वंस एंड उधर सबके क्वेश्चंस आंसर हो जाएंगे. जस्ट टॉक फॉर अ मिनट, एक चीज में करूंगा फिर मैं क्वेश्चंस पूछूंगा फिर आगे जाएंगे. सो डिक्लेयर एवरेज मार्क्स भी इसी तरीके से, आई एम गोना डिक्लेयर एन एरे which will be storing the average marks of all the students. But I'm not sure kitne students honge. So let's create a random guess of like, let's say 100 ki. So whenever you're not aware kitne students honge, make a guess of very large, let's say 100, and you're going to specify that, okay, it's going to be of the data type integer. So now we sort of created two arrays, but now we also specify distinction, merit, passed, failed. Ye to bhi humne kar diya. But now I forgot one thing. I also need to store यार कितने बच्चे पास हुए हैं, कितने स्टूडेंट्स को डिस्टिंक्शन मिली, how many of them got failed, how many of them sort of got passed and all that stuff. So अब ये कैसे करेंगे सर? अब इसको करने के लिए definitely I need to create separate variables. I need to create separate variables to store. Sir, what if the class size is greater than 100? Can't we write once a class size? The thing is, in most cases, class size won't exceed 100. Now you need to follow this 100 because generally if you open up the marking scheme always refers to some numerical point up here. So they write some integer up here rather than writing something like class size or of that nature, they write some integer. And whenever you're not aware, 100 is something which is very big size. अब इस केस में आप क्या कर सकते हो? This is very comment. So आप यहाँ पे comment डालोगे and you can say assuming maximum class size is 100. Now this tells the examiner that if the question does not specify कि class size कितने होने हैं, if it does फिर तो आपने उतना ही करना है. But if it does not, in that case you will be very much good to go कि यार okay, मैंने examiner को बता दिया. So now if an examiner opens up the paper and they're marking your whole paper, they will be able to understand that okay, एग्जामिनर स्टूडेंट को आता है कॉन्सेप्ट, सो उसने अपनी ईज के लिए एक इस तरह की डिक्लेरेशन कर दी व्हिच एक्सप्लेन्स एवरीथिंग. सो नाउ द थिंग इज, अब अगर हम नीचे जाएं, हमने ये तो कर दिया कि टोटल मार्क्स एवरेज मार्क्स के लिए कर दिया, बट नाउ आई नीड टू क्रिएट अ काउंटर कि कितने डिस्टिंक्शन होल्डर्स है, कितने मेरिट होल्डर्स है, कितने पास्ट एंड फेल्ड है. सो फॉर दैट डेफिनेटली आई नीड टू क्रिएट वेरिएबल. सो आई विल लाइक ओके, डिक्लेयर अ वेरिएबल which sort of stores the distinction count. So I can say distinction number. Declare distinction number. And that is definitely going to be storing what? It's going to store integer. Just like that, we will be having something like declare, and that declare is going to be storing merit number, how many students got the merit position. So merit number, and that's going to again be of the data type integer. Likewise, we will be having declare, which will be storing declare, that will be storing how many students basically passed it. So declare pass number, that is also going to be storing integer. And finally, we also need to store कि यार कितने बच्चे fail हुए. So I'll be like, okay, declare, and declare के बाद fail number के अंदर हम store कर देंगे कि how many students got failed. Now, when I do something like this, I need to explain what I'm trying to do. Now, one way of adding comments is कि आप सारा का सारा code complete कर दो, and at the end आप comments डालो. One other thing is, just a minute. Guys, please, I won't be accepting. अभी यार ये हमजा भाई को बहुत ही मसले हैं यार. Just give me a minute. Wouldn't writing comments at the end affect us? Okay, so the thing is, आप comments दो तरीके से लिख सकते हैं. एक ये कि when you are writing the code, आप इसी point पे comments डाल दो. Other way is कि आप सारा code लिख दो and then at the end जहाँ पे भी आपको लगे comment की जगह है, आप comment डाल दो. But अब comment डालना कैसे होता है? आपने इस तरह ये कर दिया, आपने यहाँ पे कोई comment sign डाल के आप लिख दे declaring variables. So बस आपने इस तरह के छोटे छोटे comments डालने to tell the examiner that okay bro, I'm explaining the code, I'm declaring variables, assuming class size is this, I can add a comment up here declaring constants and blah blah blah, whatever I'm trying to do, I need to explain what I'm referring to. Now everybody, यहाँ तक जो हमने अप्लाई की है ना, इसके सर एवरेज वाली एरे क्यों बनाई आपने, क्वेश्चन ने स्पेसिफाई तो नहीं किया ना, आपने 2D एरेज भी नहीं बनाए. नाउ द थिंग इज हमजा दैट द क्वेश्चन सेड कि आपने एरे के आपने एक कोई भी वो चीज तो बनानी है which will be storing the average marks for each student. So हमारे ज़हन में तो दो ही तरीके हैं, either you going to be creating a variable. Now the problem with the variable is that if I let's say create a variable which stores the marks of a student, so one variable is only going to store marks of one student. Let's say I say that I want to store marks of student 1. So average student 1 might be a variable. This might have some value 60. So now if I want to store the marks of the second student, I will be creating a different variable for that, right? Average student marks number 2, which might store the marks of the second student. Is तरीके से what if I have like some 100 students? So if I want to store the average marks for all 100 students, in that case, wouldn't it be really challenging to see कि यार ये किस तरह करना है, किस तरह नहीं करना? So for that reason, wherever we are not sure कि यार variables banane and maybe sir sometimes the question asks to make two arrays index in same sequence. Okay, that depends upon the question. In this case it does not. Sir, what if we don't declare constants for distinctions and merit, rather we use the values which are given in the question while writing the code? वो भी सही है. I mean that's perfectly fine, no problem at all. सर ये काम for loop में भी तो हो सकता है. For loop के अंदर क्या चीज गुलेला, किस तरीके से आप उसको फॉर लूप में इंप्लीमेंट करें. अब वो जो हम इसके अंदर वैल्यूज पुट करेंगे वो हम फॉर लूप में करेंगे, बट दैट इज ओनली पॉसिबल व्हिच इज चिराग, कैन यू प्लीज लेट मी नो आपके दोस्त का क्या नाम है, सो दैट आई कैन लेट हिम इन, अदरवाइज बाकियों को तो हम नहीं कर रहे. बट चलो एंटर ज़ैनब. ओके ओके डन 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 डन. See, so the thing is that सर एक सेकंड यार, आप लोग काफी ज्यादा क्वेश्चंस पूछ रहे हो, आप काफी ज्यादा क्वेश्चंस पूछ रहे हो. जस्ट अ मिनट गाइस, चिल 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 चिल, इजी क्वेश्चंस होंगे. आंसर लेट मी राइट समथिंग एंड फिर उसके बाद आप लोग को अच्छे से समझ आ जाएगी. एक तो आप लोग बहुत ज्यादा क्वेश्चंस पूछ रहे हो. ओके, सो नाउ फर्स्ट एंड फॉरमोस्ट थिंग दैट व्हेनेवर यू हैव two variables where you want to store the marks of each student, let's say average student 1, average student 2, and I have like let's say 50 students and I want to store the marks of each of those students, it's sort of yeah, I get that Iman, बिल्कुल थोड़ा सा ये मसला हो रहा है, but I guess it's because a lot of you are messing up with the chat box. What you guys should do is आप लोग chat box को बंद कर दो for all those who are just listening to the talk, and whenever you have a serious question you can raise your hand and I can get back to the chat box. Point up here is that if you look up onto the code asks you to basically declare a few variables because you need to store the total marks, you need to store the marks of the average student, you need to see how many students got distinction, how many got merit, passed or failed, and to do them I need to create variables, I need to declare some sort of an array, I need to store the values. Now a question that arises up here is that, sir, why did you sort of created an array to store the marks of the total students or the marks of all the average marks for all the students? So the answer to that is that if let's say
store the marks of all these 50 students, all these, let's say 50 students which I might have in this array, and I want to store the average of all of them. तो एक तरीका तो ये है कि I want to create average for student number 1 की जो भी student number 1 की average होगी वो मैं इसके अंदर डाल दूंगा, फिर एक दूसरा वेरिएबल बना दूंगा average student number 2 उसके अंदर डाल दूंगा, बट इस तरीके से तो करते हुए बहुत ही मुश्किल हो जाएगा. So for that reason, एक सेकंड गाइस, ये मुझे समझ आ गई है, व्हाट्स द प्रॉब्लम, जस्ट गिव मी अ मिनट, जस्ट गिव मी अ मिनट, just give me a minute. Yeah, if you have any questions, आप पूछ लो. We're done. We're done with this. एक सेकंड, let me remove everyone जो कि थोड़ा सा हुआ है, so that we can focus upon it आराम से. चलो एक काम करते हैं, लेट्स स्टार्ट ऑफ विद द क्वेश्चन. शुरू से आप लोग को क्वेश्चन ही सही से समझ नहीं आई, एंड लेट्स स्टार्ट इट फ्रॉम हियर. सो व्हाट द क्वेश्चन सेज इज, अभी एट दिस पॉइंट ऑल द स्टूडेंट्स हु वर सॉर्ट ऑफ जस्ट रैंडमली टॉकिंग दे हैव बीन रिमूव्ड. सो इसलिए यार एनी क्वेश्चंस व्हिच आर नॉट रिलेटेड टू 15 मार्कर विल बी डिस्कस्ड लेटर ऑन. सो अभी के लिए आप लोग परेशान ना हो. सो द क्वेश्चन सेज दैट यू नीड टू क्रिएट अ प्रोग्राम दैट स्टोर्स द these four requirements, calculates their total marks, that calculates their average marks, that sort of calculates कि यार आपने क्या कुछ करना है, and you need these four conditions. So if you want to meet these four conditions, अब ये आपने करने क्या है, तो इसके लिए definitely सर क्वेश्चन नहीं आंसर करने तो चैट बंद कर दो. Valid point, to be very honest. I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to turn off the chat for a while. I'm going to write the code first and उसको आपको समझा दूं, फिर आप लोगों ने करना है, because I feel like flow ही नहीं बन रहा. So if I have to give you guys a quick recap, there is one 1D array that stores the name of all the students. Then there is a 2D array that stores the marks of all the students. Okay, that stores the marks of all. If I'm going to come to your question later on, don't worry. Say that stores the marks of all the students. Now we need to write a program that goes through a class which has a total number of this many students. Class size can the जो भी value है इतने students, and you need to basically count the total marks for all the students. Now how many subjects do we have? That value is stored in subject number. You can give the question a quick read and आपको अच्छे से समझ आ जाएगी. And now we need to write a program that basically assigns a grade to a student, where the grade criteria has been stated up here, that if it's greater than 70, distinction, greater than 55, less than distinction, merit, and so on, pass and fail. And now we need to create a program that calculates the total marks for all the students for all their subjects, and then also calculates the average mark for each student for all their subjects. And then at the end outputs the name, combined total marks, average mark, and the grade awarded. And finally कि किस तरीके से कितने नंबर ऑफ डिस्टिंक्शन है, कितने नंबर ऑफ मेरिट्स है, कितने नंबर ऑफ पासेस एंड कितने नंबर ऑफ फेल्स है. अब इसको करने का तरीका क्या है? फर्स्ट एंड फॉरमोस्ट, व्हेनेवर यू हैव अ 15 मार्कर, आपने ये देखना है कि यार मेरे कितने बच्चों को जो भी वैल्यूज होंगी वो मैं स्टोर कहाँ पे करूंगा. सो इफ आई वांट टू स्टोर दीज वैल्यूज, आई नीड टू क्रिएट वेरिएबल्स, आई नीड टू क्रिएट एरेज, आई नीड टू क्रिएट कॉन्स्टेंट्स, राइट. सो फॉर दैट रीजन आप जब भी 15 मार्कर स्टार्ट करोगे, आपने सबसे पहले करना है डिक्लेयरिंग कांस्टेंट्स एंड एरेज. नाउ इन दिस केस इफ यू सी, मेरे क्वेश्चन के अंदर वैल्यूज फिक्स्ड सी थी. आई नो दैट व्हेन द वैल्यू वाज ग्रेटर देन 70 इट्स अ डिस्टिंक्शन, व्हेन द वैल्यू वाज ग्रेटर देन 55 it was a merit, when the value was greater than 40 it was passed. So what I did was, rather than doing it normally, मैंने उनको constant बना दिया. Now a lot of students would have this one question, sir, कि अगर हम rather than creating them constants, later in code use them something like if marks are greater than 70 and do something like distinction wali baat. So is that wrong? No, that's 100% fine. That's also perfectly fine. But this constant is just to ensure कि आपका code efficient हो. By declaring something as constants, your code is going to be efficient, which sort of gives it a bit of boost. But it's not like you don't declare the constant part. तो अगर आप उसको दूसरे तरीके से भी करना चाहते हैं, that's also fine. So a lot of you might have this one question in your mind, तो वो यहाँ पे solve हो चुका होगा. Then the second point is, a lot of you would have this one question कि sir अब ये total marks and average marks को आपने array क्यों बनाया? Now the thing is, if I want to store the marks of 10 students, तो 10 students को marks store करने का क्या तरीका है? One way is that I sort of do one by one. Let's say I store the marks of student number 1 in one variable, student number 2 in second variable, student number 3 in third variable. But if I do it that way, it's going to be very challenging, right? क्योंकि 10 students के लिए 10 अलग-अलग variable बनाने. To prevent that, what I can do is मैं एक एरे बना देता हूँ which is very large, let's say of 100 elements, because I'm not sure class में कितने students हैं. What you need to do is you need to create it of a size which is round about 100. 100 is sort of something जो कि examiner को बता देता है okay, it's a very big array which can accommodate most of the students. And बस आपने एक comment डाल देना है कि assuming maximum class size is 100, so that examiner knows कि okay आपकी class में 100 बच्चा ही है. अब आपने करना क्या है, आपने ये एक array बनाई which at every position एक बच्चे के मार्क्स स्टोर होंगे. So like I say that the student number one up here, student number one is Mars, right? So if I go to the total marks array, the total marks array position number one will also be storing the value, which is marks of Mars. So मार्क्स के जो भी टोटल मार्क्स है लेट्स से 500 वो हम यहाँ पे स्टोर करेंगे. अब ये कैसे होगा, किस तरीके से, वो जब हम कोड इंप्लीमेंटेशन देखेंगे तो आपको समझ आ जाएगी. एंड इसी तरीके से इफ आई गो टू पोजीशन नंबर 50 तो वहां पे 50th पोजीशन के होंगे स्टोर. बट रादर देन क्रिएटिंग सेपरेट वेरिएबल्स, दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ सिंप्लीफाइज माय होल मॉडल टू अ वेरी ग्रेट एक्सटेंट. एंड लाइकवाइज इफ आई वांट टू स्टोर द एवरेज मार्क्स ऑफ द स्टूडेंट्स तो वो भी काफी मुझे समझ आ रही है कि दैट्स प्रीटी मच वेरी इजी. इट्स नॉट दैट चैलेंजिंग इन दिस पॉइंट, बिकॉज व्हाई, if I want to store the marks of all these students and I want to store the average of each of them one by one, I'll be making use of average marks, which will be basically an array where at position number one, student number one के marks होंगे, at position number two, student number two के average marks होंगे, at position number three, student number three के average marks होंगे, and so on. So we sort of created these two arrays. And then definitely once we are done with the declaration of constants and the arrays, the question themselves clearly mentions that you need to create a variable that stores how many distinctions we got, how many merits, passes and fails. So उसके लिए हमने बना दिए चार counters. I'm like, okay, store distinction number, which is integer. वो इसमें होंगे कि how many students got integer distinctions, how many got merit, how many got pass, and how many got fail. अब ये तो यहाँ तक तो कोड बहुत easily हो जाएगा. The main challenge comes up here, where I now need to solve the very first objective. The first objective says that you need to calculate the combined total marks for each student for all their subjects, which basically means कि मैंने अब हर बच्चे के marks access करने. So if I want to access the marks of the student, I know that there is a variable with an array of 2-dimension or 2D array which has the name of student marks. Now this 2-dimensional array is always something like this, where you have two parameters inside it. The first one is going to be specifying कि यार उस student number के, कि whether it's student number 1, student number 2, 3, 4, 5. And the second one is basically going to tell me कि यार कौन से subject के number. अब ये होगा कि sir, let me make a small diagram for you and आपको समझ आ जाएगी. So if I have something like this, let's assume we have something like this. And I say that these are storing, this column is storing the score of maths. This is storing the marks of CS, and this stores the marks of physics, let's say. And here, student number 1 is storing, let's say, 30, 50, and 70. Student number 2 is like, okay, 40, 60, 90. And student number 3 is 80, 50, 40. That is how you create a 2D array, right? So whenever we have a 2D array is usually accessed using this format of array, followed by the row counter, followed by the column counter. So in this case, these are my rows, which means that if I want to access the marks of student number 1, this 30 is basically the marks the student scored in maths, this 50 is the marks the student scored in computer science, and this 70 is the marks the student scored in physics. And I want to calculate the total of all of this, which means I want to calculate 30, 50, and 70. Which apparently means that I want to first take this value, which is at column number 1. Then I want to take the value which is at column number 2. And then I want to take the value which is at column number 3. And once I've totaled it for all subjects, no matter how many subjects there are, after सबके total करने के बाद, now I would be like, okay, let's move to student number 2. अब ये करना कैसे? So इसके लिए I need to make use of for loops. अब for loops इसके अंदर use कैसे होंगे? First and foremost thing, I'll be like, okay, आपने make use करना है. You need to first of all go from the very first student, and then you need to basically go till जितने भी class में बच्चे. So let's say there are 20, 30. अब I'm not sure कितने, but exam में इन्होंने clearly mention कर दिया कि there is a variable with the name of class size कि इसके अंदर जितने भी number of students होंगे वो store होगा. So I'd be like, okay, let's make use of a for loop, and that for loop will be going through the entire program from student number 1 till the class size. So for स्टूडेंट नंबर, अब यहाँ पे काफी स्टूडेंट्स होंगे, दे माइट मेक यूज ऑफ द वेरिएबल काउंट. अब वो जो मीनिंगफुल आइडेंटिफायर की बात हो रही थी वो ये हो रही थी कि यहाँ पे अब आपने काउंट नहीं यूज करना, यू नीड टू डू समथिंग लाइक फॉर स्टूडेंट काउंटर. so that it's explained on its own कि यार this counter is basically storing कि कौन से student की बारी है. So for student counter 1 to class size कि okay, I'm talking about student number 1, student number 2, student number 3, student number 4, blah blah blah. So right now what this will do is if I go to this 2D array, यहाँ पे मैंने एक student को ले लेना है. Let's say I grab this student number 1. So this means that if I, let's say, create a model like this, where I want to access all the marks in an entire row, and I know that this specific first value in a 2D array is my row value. So your row value in this case is my student number. So this means that when I'm trying to access the marks of the student, यहाँ पे मेरे क्या आएगा? यहाँ पे मेरा आएगा student count. Why? Because student counter is basically telling me कि मैं अभी कौन से row पे हूँ. And if I make this model in front of me, now this model will not be given to you in your exam. It's not like कि आपके exam में इस तरीके से कोई model given होगा या something like that. But rather होगा क्या? आपको इस तरीके से एक इमेज खुद से ड्रॉ करनी होगी एंड इस इमेज को देखते हुए आपने इन्फर करना है कि ओके यहाँ पे इट्स सॉर्ट ऑफ telling me that if I want to create a table, इस table के अंदर values कैसे store होगी? Like it's definitely not possible that I do something like 30, 50, 60, 90 and I say that okay, I created this way and I say that mass के सारे marks are stored this way and this is C's. If you do it this way, वो थोड़ा चैलेंजिंग हो जाएगा. तो आपने अपनी आसानी से, इवन तो दिस माइट बी पॉसिबल, आपने क्या करना है, आपने पहले ही इस तरीके से एक मॉडल डिफाइन कर देना है एंड यू नीड टू क्रिएट अ मॉडल लाइक दिस एंड फिर आप जस्ट इवन इफ यू मेक यूज ऑफ द सेकंड वन तो आपका सारा कोड उस तरीके से होगा. बट वट एवर इमेज यू मेक, फॉलो दैट बिकॉज दैट्स गोना गिव यू लीड यू टू द करेक्ट आंसर. इन दिस केस आई वांट टू एक्सेस स्टूडेंट नंबर 1 के मार्क्स. सो हाउ विल आई बी एक्सेसिंग दिस स्पेसिफिक कॉलम? The specific column of this specific block इसको access करने के लिए the code which we write is will be like okay student marks and within the brackets I specify two things. Firstly, student counter, and if I let's say that I want to access the very first column, I'm going to write 1. So what this does is that you go to this specific, because student counter's first value is what? It's starting from 1. I'm going to say that you go to the position number 1. You go to position number 1 and then you grab position number, column number 1 value, which is 30. But now let's say I want to go to 50. So I'm going to change this 1 to 2. If I want to go to 370, I want to change this to 3, which apparently means that this specific counter is basically my subject counter. So this is sort of telling me, okay, if this is position number 1, this is my subject number 1. If it becomes 2, this is my subject number 2. If this becomes 3, this is my subject number 3, and so on. So for that, what I can do is I would be like, okay, why not create a separate loop which checks the subjects? So I could be like, okay, एक तो आपने use कर दिया कि student wise, कि okay, for student number 1, let's say अब मैंने एक student को देखना है, अब मैंने सारे पहले student के सारे marks add up करें. कैसे करूँगा? I would be like, okay, you took it for one student, now make use of another loop for student की जगह subject counter. So I would be like, okay, for subject counter, but this time this subject counter needs to store the number of subjects. So definitely it's going to start from 1 because 0 subjects to nahi hote. So from subject counter from the first subject till where, अब मुझे नहीं पता कितने subjects होंगे, but the question themselves mentioned that the variable subject number will be storing how many subjects I have. So I'll be like, okay, go from the very first subject all the way to no matter how many subjects you have, the variable subject number will be storing कि कितने subjects होंगे. So you need to go from 1 to subject number. And now if I write something like this, if I write something like student marks, and bracket के अंदर I write first the row number, which is what? Which is basically my student counter, and then within the comma, the other end, I write subject number. It's pretty much very evident that what I'm trying to say is that originally when the program runs for the first time, the value of subject counter and student number counter is both going to be 1, which means that I'm targeting this. But then this means I now need to shift towards the second column. So this means that I want to change this to 2, whereas I want to keep this 1 as the same. So what I want to do up here is, here I want to create a student counter, which means that मैं एक student के marks लूँगा for एक student के marks. And based upon for that one student, I'm going to go through the entire subject number array. I would be like the entire एक loop में use करूंगा from the first value of subject number till whatever the value of subject number is. I want to go through the entire subject number count, and for all of them, I'm going to grab this value of marks that is stored there, and I want to add that into a array with the name of total, which I declared separately up here as किधर गया total marks. So I would be like, okay, this total marks now definitely it's an array. So when we create these arrays on our own, it's totally assumed that when I say something like total marks position number one, this is the same, this is going to be storing the marks for student number one. This is going to be storing the marks for student number one. So if I say up here student counter, the student counter, if it has the value one and I put those marks in this total marks one, it's 100% fine. But now if I want to do it this way, ये तो एक student के लिए होगा. But if I want to do it generally for all the students, how will I be writing it? I'll be like, okay, you do it total marks, but rather than it being one, you do it for the student counter. So whatever the value of the student counter is, let's say it's student number one, so टोटल एरे के अंदर पोजीशन नंबर वन पे आपके स्टूडेंट नंबर वन के वैल्यूज हो जाएंगे. यू डू इट फॉर नंबर टू, तो आपके स्टूडेंट काउंटर की जो वेरिएबल नंबर टू है उसके अंदर वैल्यू स्टोर होगी, 3, 4, 5 एंड सो ऑन. ये इस तरीके से आपके वो सब कुछ हो रहा होगा. सो अब आई वांट टू कैलकुलेट द टोटल ऑफ ऑल द स्टूडेंट्स, राइट? सो व्हाट आई नीड टू डू अप हियर इज आई विल बी लाइक, ओके, in this total marks variable, I want to store the marks at a position. But what position? Whatever the student counter number is, right? So I would be like, okay, go to the array which I created with the name of student counter, with the name of total marks, and उसके अंदर जो मैंने student counter वाला element डाला है, go to that position, so that if it's student number one, go to position number one. If it's, let's say, student number two, go to position number two. If it's student number three, go to position number three. If it's student number 13, go to position number 13. And wherever, whatever position you are at that position, you need to add the respective marks of the student. So like, let's say आपने जब ये किया student counter subject number, and let's say it has the value 1 1, so it's accessing this 30 right now. So I'm going to take this 30, I'm going to add 30 inside it, and then I want you to basically go on and आप एक दफा फिर जाओ, but rather than now going towards subject number one, you should point towards subject number two, so that your array points to this 50. And now rather than it having only 30, what I want you to do is आप इसके अंदर 50 भी add कर दो, so that 30 plus 50 becomes 80. So now your total is storing 80. Just like that, you might now go towards the third one, which is the physics one, right? So now you shift towards subject number three, and subject number three is 70 will be then added inside this, and now you have 30 plus 50 plus 70, which is going to be what? It's going to be 150. And so your total now stores the value of 150. So this means that if this is sort of implementing what? It's just the concept of हमने एक चीज पढ़ी थी counting, and then at the same time हमने एक चीज पढ़ी थी, I forgot the name यार, counting, and हमने sum पढ़ा था, yeah, I guess. So this logic up here is basically finding the sum of all marks. So sum. So अब ये sum कैसे ढूंढते हैं? What I need to do is I will be writing total marks, and total marks के बाद I would be like, okay, whatever the value inside this is beforehand, whatever the value is inside this beforehand, आप उसी value को लेके, क्योंकि definitely originally if I want to know why am I trying to do this, because it's the same as if you see for student number one, let's say if I add this 30 inside this variable, next time when I go to position number two, I want it to be 30 plus 50, right? I want to do it 30 plus 50. So this 30 is in this position of total add student count. So whatever the value previously is, उसके अंदर आपने to add कर देना है value at that new position. And how do you access this new position value? You do it by writing this statement: student marks, student counter, subject number. You go for whatever student number it is, student number one. उसके लिए whatever your subject number at this point is, उस row में जाके आपकी जो भी block होगा, इसकी जो values होंगी वो आपने कर देना है. So I'd be like, okay, go to this position, and because I'm writing the code generally, I would be like, okay, easy peasy, plus जगह नहीं है, I'm gonna write it up here. So I'd be like, okay, student marks, and marks के बाद I would be like, okay, you need to access what? The first row, the first part is always going to be the element. So if I want to create a model like this, definitely I want the student number to be row wise. And यहाँ पे let's say I want to store marks for subject number one, subject number two, subject number three, जो कि column में आएगा. So because I want my students number to be at the row position, कि यार this is student number one, this is student number two, मैं यहाँ पे लिखूंगा student counter, student counter. And just like that, because I want to keep the subject at the column size, I would be like, okay, put the subject number up here. So now what this line will do is it's going to go through the entire array. It's going to be like, okay, currently it has the student counter position as 1. So आपने जाना है position number 1 पे and subject number is also 1. You need to go to that point, उस पे जो भी values है, put that value into the total marks variable. आपने वो इसके अंदर डाल दिया at whatever the student position is. So if student is number 2, so आपने number 2 in total marks array वहां पे वो value store कर दी. Done for one subject. Now I want you to go to next subject, which apparently means that if this has 1, now I want this subject counter to become 2. How do we do that in a for loop? You just make use of the next function. So I'll be like, okay, next subject count, and eventually once this ends, this entire thingy will basically go through the entire array and एक student के लिए जितने subjects हैं उनके marks store होंगे. How? Because definitely आपने एक student के marks आपने पहले 30 को कर दिया, you added this 30, then you're like, okay, you moved on to the next one, you added 50 inside it, okay, this became 80, then you're like, okay, you got 70, you added 70 inside it, and boom, you get 150. So now this 150 is stored at the total what do we call it, array which we declared at whatever the student position number is, वहां पे आप, which means that at this point I'm done for one student and I've sort of calculated the entire total marks for one student. Now I'm opening up the chat box and I want everyone to be very specific question. अगर कोई इधर उधर की बात हुई तो वो appreciate नहीं होगी. If there is any specific question about this addition part तो वो मुझसे पूछ लो. एक बाय one by one. सही easy scene है. Spam ना कर देना. So, any questions? तो पूछो अभी about this one section which we just did. This is what we implemented as a. अब यहाँ पे मैं एक comment डाल दूंगा कि this is basically totaling the marks. Totaling the marks. Any questions up here? अच्छा. Sir, don't we just use for loop when size is known? No. If you don't know the size, but your size is basically stored in a variable like this, that is also 100% fine. सर आपने 1 to क्लास साइज किया लेकिन आपने ऊपर 100 स्टूडेंट्स की अरे बनाई. यस, वो जो हमने 100 स्टूडेंट्स की अरे बनाई है वो एजम्पशन है कि क्लास में 100 से ज्यादा बच्चे नहीं होंगे, व्हिच अपेरेंटली मींस कि आपने जो आपकी क्लास साइज है दैट इज गोइंग टू बी लेस देन 100. सर इनपुट क्यों नहीं लिया? क्योंकि आपको क्वेश्चन ने क्लियरली मेंशन कर दिया कि यार आपके वैल्यूज आर ऑलरेडी इनिशियलाइज्ड. यू सी, यू डू नॉट नीड टू इनिशियलाइज द डेटा इन द एरे, यू डू नॉट नीड टू टेक एनी सॉर्ट ऑफ इनपुट. सर जो आपने टोटल मार्क्स में एरे को सम करवाया है, जी मैंने किया है, इसमें क्या करें? सर व्हाट इज सम? इट इज जस्ट अ कमेंट टू टेल देम कि यार हम एक सम अभी फाइंड करना चाह रहे हैं. सर आपने स्टार्ट में डिस्टिंक्शन और मेरिट में ग्रेटर देन और लेस देन क्यों नहीं? वो आगे यूज होगा, अभी यहाँ पे यूज नहीं होगा. सर डू वी नीड टू एज्यूम हाउ मेनी सब्जेक्ट्स? नो, वो आपके जितने नंबर ऑफ सब्जेक्ट्स है वो यहाँ पे क्लियरली इस वेरिएबल के अंदर स्टोर्ड है. सो इस वजह से रादर देन एजम्पशन हम डायरेक्टली उस वेरिएबल की वैल्यू ही यूज कर रहे हैं. सही है. Sir, again tell the totaling. Okay, वो सर या totaling. Yeah, I forgot the word. बिल्कुल it's totaling. My bad. बिल्कुल. सर नहीं आया कुछ भी, आप बाद में ईमान watch it later on, मे बी आपको तब समझ आ जाएगा. सही है सर. तो कांस्टेंट इक्वल्स टू 70 है, उसका क्या मतलब है? ये तो हमने बेसिकली एक कांस्टेंट बनाया जो कि हम आगे यूज करेंगे. द वे यू क्रिएट वेरिएबल्स वी कैन आल्सो क्रिएट कांस्टेंट्स, एंड कांस्टेंट बनाने का तरीका ये है कि आप इक्वल्स टू पुट करते हैं. सो टुडे टोटल मार्क्स स्टूडेंट काउंटर वाली लाइन. ओके, ये मैं आप लोग को फिर से समझा देता हूँ. ये if anybody could kindly share my YouTube channel, it's code catalyst, वहां पे share होगा. Sir, is it possible that in our exam they say the sequence in arrays is not the same? नहीं, इस तरह के इतने complex questions नहीं आते, don't worry. इसी लूप के अंदर एवरेज नहीं आ सकते. इट्स बेटर कि आप यहाँ पे ना करो, आगे होगा, मैं बताता हूँ क्यों. अब नाउ मैं फिर से री एक्सप्लेन कर रहा हूँ. आई एम सॉर्ट ऑफ टर्निंग ऑफ द चैट बॉक्स अगेन एंड फिर बाद में रीओपन कर देंगे इफ यू हैव अदर क्वेश्चंस. बट बिकॉज यू ऑल यूज दिस वन, हैड दिस वन क्वेश्चन कि इस लाइन में क्या हो रहा है. सो व्हाट वी आर ट्राइंग टू से अप हियर इज कि हमने बोल दिया कि एक स्टूडेंट मार्क्स 2D एरे होगी, एक 2D array है with the name of student marks, जिसके अंदर we created like how does a 2D array works? हमारी 2D arrays इस तरह होती है, like it's two-dimensional. And in this, if I have to, let's say, store the marks for one student, so it's generally going to be like, okay, if there is student number 1 Mars, I want to store the marks of Mars up in this row. So I'll be like, okay, Mars got 100 in CS, in English he might get something like 80, in physics he might, let's say, get 65. So let's say I scored all my marks up here. So now if I want to access these marks of mine, मैं इसको करूँगा कैसे? For that I will be writing this student marks. Definitely that's how you study, right? 2D array को access करने का तरीका तरीका यही है कि you write the name of the array, then you specify the row number, and then you specify the column number. So in this case, my column number is basically my subject number. This is my subject number 1, this is my subject number 2, subject number 3. अब कितने subjects हैं वो variable subject number में store है, and कितने specific rows है वो हमारे number of students है. This might be student number 1, this will be student number 2, this will be student number 3, 4, and so on. So what I'm trying to implement up here is कि मैंने एक student के value को पकड़ना है, and I need to put this variable or a different array with the name of total. अब वो मैं क्या करूँ? I'm like, okay, you go for one student. Let's say you go for a student. सही है, आपने एक स्टूडेंट को पकड़ा, फिर आपने एक स्टूडेंट के कॉलम नंबर 1 की वैल्यू ली, यू पुट दैट वैल्यू इन द टोटल वेरिएबल और टोटल एरे, बेसिकली टोटल मार्क्स का हमने एक एरे बनाई. गो टू द व्हाटएवर पोजीशन नंबर ऑफ दैट स्टूडेंट इज एट दैट पोजीशन, बिकॉज टोटल मार्क्स इज अ 1D array. So a 1D array basically means that if I have an array like this, which is something like this, इसके अंदर we have total marks being stored. Total marks. And inside these total marks, let's say we have 50 up here, we have 60 up here, we have 80 up here, we have 90 up here. This is basically the marks for student number 1, because it's position number 1, right? So जो भी यहाँ पे marks store होंगे, वहाँ पे basically student number 1 की value store होगी. Student number 2 के marks basically हम यहाँ store करें, student number 3 के यहाँ पे, 4 के यहाँ के, and so on. So हम क्या बोल रहे हैं? We are like, okay, go to the array total marks at position student counter, and वहाँ पे आपने basically store करने the marks of the student, क्योंकि टोटल मार्क्स स्टूडेंट काउंटर की पोजीशन पे प्लस स्टूडेंट मार्क्स, लेकिन आपने जो भी उसके अंदर प्रीवियस वैल्यूज है वो प्लस जो आपके न्यू वैल्यू है वो ऐड करनी. लाइक फॉर इंस्टेंस, अब टोटल के अंदर हमने शुरू में 100 पुट कर दिए. सो नाउ आई वांट यू टू डू इज कि अब आप नेक्स्ट सब्जेक्ट के लिए जब मार्क्स ऐड करें ना, तो आप प्रीवियस 100 लो, whatever the previous 100 were, and into that you want to go to the same student number 1 ही हो, but now you point to column number 2, and so आप column number 2 के ऊपर आते हो, which is basically this 80. So you're like, okay, 100 plus this 80, and so it's going to make a 180, and वो 180 आपके sort of यहाँ पे इसको update कर देंगे. Now you have 180 inside this, and now you do it for the third time, and you see that the third time your student number stays the same, but now you're pointing towards the subject number 3, which is basically this physics. अब वो आ गया 65. So अब आपने क्या किया कि you take the same 180, आपका 180 same to same वही आया, but rather than now being 80, you're now pointing to 65. So you add 65 into 180. So 180 plus 65. So now if you add these two, आपको समझ आ जाएगा कि it's now going to be having the value 245. So अब आपकी value 45 यहाँ पे आ गई. In this इस इसी section के अंदर, whatever the position of the student is, इसके अंदर आपकी 245 आ गई. And boom, you sort of calculated the total marks for a specific student. So that is the exact logic which is being implemented in this whole line, where I'm trying to access the marks of each subject, and for each of those subjects I'm calculating the marks at that position, and जो भी वो marks है वो मैं array के एक position जो एक मैंने separate array बनाई with the name of total marks, उसके अंदर जाके मैं store करूँ. And once I store the marks for one subject, I'm like, okay, एक subject के लिए कर लिया, now you go for the next subject, and you sort of do it one by one, one by one, one by one, one by one, and at the end, once you have done it for the entire ऊपर वाले के लिए arrow कर दिया, when you are done for all the subjects, now you sort of have total marks having the total of all your subjects. Now we had a question, sir, इसी के अंदर average क्यों नहीं करते? एवरेज सब्जेक्ट काउंटर वाले के लूप के अंदर नहीं होगा. व्हाई? बिकॉज लेट्स से आपने एक सब्जेक्ट के लिए मार्क्स स्टोर कर दिया. अब यहाँ पे देखो, आप तो टोटल फाइंड करना चाह रहे हो, विच बेसिकली मीन्स कि आपने ये 80 भी करना है, प्लस 50 भी करना है, प्लस 40 भी करना है. एंड अगर आप इसी के अंदर यहाँ पे एवरेज कैलकुलेट कर लो, लेट्स से इस पॉइंट पे, तो आपने तो अभी टोटल ही फाइंड नहीं किया. टोटल तो तब होगा जब आपने सारे सब्जेक्ट्स के लिए मार्क्स ऐड कर दिए, एंड सारे सब्जेक्ट्स के लिए मार्क्स तब ऐड होंगे व्हेन यू गो फ्रॉम 1 टू सब्जेक्ट नंबर. नाउ व्हेन यू गेट आउट ऑफ दिस लूप, एट दिस पॉइंट you have sort of found out the total. So you have found out the total marks. Now, when I know how many total marks I have scored, at this point, I can calculate the average. अब जब मैंने total marks ही ना find किया, तो उस केस के अंदर तो मैं average नहीं calculate कर सकता, right? So now, when I know the marks for all the students, now at this point, I will be able to calculate the average. Is this clear, everybody? Yes or no? Chat box is open. If there are any questions, तो पूछ लो. If there are any questions, तो अभी पूछ लो. पता नहीं, क्लास जैसी ये एंड होगी तो हम बंद कर लेंगे. सो अब जब सर टोटल मार्क्स को ऊपर 0 से असाइन करना था, ओ या थैंक यू फॉर लेटिंग मी नो हुजैफा, वो हमने करना था, वो मिस दैट, वो हम बाद में करेंगे. बट या
that was a good point. हम बाद में करेंगे. Now let's move on कि अगर हमने ये स्टूडेंट के सारे मार्क्स ऐड अप कर दिए तो हमने एक चीज तो कर ली. वी आर डन विद दिस पार्ट कि हमने टोटल मार्क्स फॉर ईच स्टूडेंट करने के लिए हमने कोड लिख दिया कि ओके नाउ इफ आई डू समथिंग लाइक दिस इट्स गोना कैलकुलेट द मार्क्स फॉर वन स्टूडेंट. बट नाउ आई वांट टू डू इट फॉर ऑल द स्टूडेंट व्हिच मींस कि हमने फॉर लूप हर स्टूडेंट के लिए भी लगा लिया कि फॉर all the students from 1 to the class size आपने सबके लिए ये प्रोसेस रिपीट करना है so that student number 1 के लिए भी हो 2 के लिए भी हो 3 के लिए भी हो and so on for the entire class it has been done. But the question doesn't end here. The question says that you also need to calculate the average mark. Now, if I want to calculate the average mark for let's say one student, तो एक तो ये कि first of all I need to calculate कि उसके total marks क्या हैं. Because what's the formula of average? Average is basically total by whatever your occurrence is, right? So how many, if I want to calculate the average of all subjects, I'll be like, okay, total by the number of subjects. So now if I want to calculate this average value, so average calculate करने का तरीका ये है कि if I want to store the average, definitely I will be storing it in the array which we created as average marks, right? So we created this average marks array and I will be like, okay, go to this average marks array and whatever the student position is, which is basically the student counter, go to that position, student counter, and in that position I want you to store this value of what the total marks of the students, जो भी उस student के total marks है. And अब वो total marks कहाँ पे store होंगे? जो भी student के position number है, like let's say position number 1 पे stored है. So I don't know what student number is, right? So I would be like, okay, total marks and student counter. So whatever the student counter value is उस position में जाके, because it's coming under the same loop, right? So I'd be like, okay, go to total marks, go to the same student counter, and then divide it by the number of subjects, which is being told to us in this subject num variable. So you divide this by subject NO. And what this does is it sort of calculates your average and it stores those average in this variable of in this array of average marks. But then at the same time, if you look up, the question also says one other important thing, that you need to round it up to the nearest whole integer. So when a question says that you need to round it up to the nearest integer, one way of doing it is by making use of the round function, जो कि हम जनरली करते हैं कि हमने राउंड फंक्शन यूज करना है. बट इफ आई लेट्स से वांट टू यूज सम अदर टेक्निक, द सेकंड वे ऑफ डूइंग इट इज कि आई कैन बेसिकली राइट द कीवर्ड प्लस 0.5 and I can basically assign this with the function int. What this int does is it basically converts this into an integer. So now if you do something like int 32.7, it's basically going to make it 33, sort of similar to round function, but yeah. So you should be aware of this too. If you see something like this int, it sort of converts it into integer. Why am I adding a 0.5? Because let's say I have something like 32.1 and I want to round it up to the nearest next integer. If you see, to the nearest whole number, in most cases, if it is something like 32.3 or 32.4, the best way is to round it up to the next element, which will be only done if I do something like int 32 plus 0.5, क्योंकि 0.5 जब मैं ऐड करूंगा तो it's going to become 32.9, which is going to be very very close to 33. So you're sort of giving them this advantage कि okay मैंने एक value round up कर दिया. So the other way of doing it is definitely by making use of the round function. Can you just make a simple average variable rather than using a parameter? नहीं, तो average अगर आपने सारी class की store करनी है, so you see आपने सारे के सारी class की average store करनी है. So अगर आपने सारे के सारे की 1 by 1 store करनी है, तो अगर आपके पास 50 बच्चे हो एंड यू वांट टू स्टोर द एवरेज ऑफ ऑल 50 स्टूडेंट्स, एक तो फिर आपको ये करना होगा कि आपको 50 डिफरेंट वेरिएबल्स बनाने होंगे. बट वी डोंट वांट दैट, राइट? हमने तो एक स्टूडेंट कि बार बार तो हम ये नहीं कर सकते कि 50 स्टूडेंट्स है तो मैं 50 वेरिएबल्स बनाऊं, ईच वेरिएबल स्टोरिंग द मार्क्स ऑफ ऑल स्टूडेंट्स, बिकॉज द क्वेश्चन सेज यू शुड बी एबल टू स्टोर द एवरेज मार्क्स फॉर ऑल द स्टूडेंट्स. सो फॉर दैट रीजन वी क्रिएट दिस एरे एंड हमारे पास ये एरेज के अंदर वैल्यूज आ रही है. सो एग्जैक्टली द सेम स्ट्रिंग हैंडलिंग वाला फंक्शन, वी नीड टू फाइंड द टोटल मार्क्स ऑफ 1 टू स्टूडेंट काउंटर. यस एग्जैक्टली हनान, हमने 1 से लेकर जितने स्टूडेंट काउंटर के अंदर स्टूडेंट्स हैं, नंबर ऑफ स्टूडेंट्स, वी नीड टू फाइंड इट फॉर ऑल ऑफ दोस स्टूडेंट्स. सो नाउ if I calculate the total average marks for all the students, I'm sort of done with one important thing. I have met this criteria. I calculated the total marks for all the students, and at the same time, I calculated the average, which means that now I'll be solving this part. I need to output the values for each of them. So I'll be like, okay, let me add a comment. That comment could be added up here. यहाँ पे मैं लिख दूंगा output details for students. So आप कोई भी कमेंट्स डाल सकते हैं. इट्स नॉट नेसेसरी कि आप कोई बहुत ही आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स कमेंट्स डालें एंड ऑल दैट स्टफ, बट इट्स सॉर्ट ऑफ वेरी इजी कि अब आपने क्या करना है,
it says that you need to output the name. So where are the names stored? The name of a student is stored in a 1D array with the name of student name. So I'd be like, okay, let me output that first of all. So I'm going to write the keyword output, and I would be like, output student name is student name. Oh, name is, and then comma, and you write the name of the student. But was stored kidhar hai? It's stored in a 1D array with the name of student name. But at what position? That position is the same. So like if I say that यहाँ पे student number 1 है, so student number 1 जो student marks के अंदर हो, total marks के अंदर हो, average marks के अंदर हो, या student names के अंदर हो, वो सारे की जगह same ही रहेगा. So if I have to find the name of the first student, it's going to be the same as student names, student counter. So student counter के अंदर जो भी पहले बच्चे का नाम होगा वो यहाँ पे आ जाएगा, and you sort of output it there. Just like that, the second thing they ask us to output is their average marks, right? इसी तरह ना, let me see. It says output, अच्छा, total marks and average marks, and then हमने grade को बताना है. So I'll be like, okay, let me see output कितने their total marks. So output total marks, and now I'll be like, okay, the total marks could be accessed using the array total marks, and उसके अंदर you need to go to the position of student count. Likewise, now if I want to output and calculate the average marks of a student, so I'll be like, okay, go to the average marks array. So I'll be like, output the average marks. वो कैसे access होगा? Comma, average marks array, average marks, and in that you go to student counter position. Finally, it says that now if I, let's say, want to store the value of the grade, अब वो मैं कैसे करूँगा? Because I'm sort of done with the first three part. I have done the name, I have sort of outputted the marks, the average marks, but now I need to calculate the grade. So up here, I'm going to be making use of these. अब ये use कैसे होगा? I'll be making use of if statements. Sir, can you send the question and the code? Yeah, of course I will. Don't worry. Say so. अब इसको करने का तरीका क्या है? I will be making use of conditional statement. So again, add a comment using conditional statements for grade. So now I will be making use of an if statement, which will sort of simplify everything. That if the total marks, or perhaps I need to basically define the grade using the total marks or the average marks. You see, they say that based upon the average marks. So I'll be like, okay, if the average marks of that student are greater than the distinction value, which is basically 70, then this means your grade is distinction, and you need to say that distinction count के अंदर, if originally it had 0, make that 1. So अब ये logic हमने use करनी है. So I'll be like, okay, if whatever my average marks are, average marks for that student, which is going to be stored in the array at a position of student counter, if that is basically greater than distinction, if it is greater than or equal to distinction, whenever you have a constant, you directly write the keyword distinction. If let's say you did not declare it to be a distinction, in that case आप यहाँ पे फिर 70 लिखते. सही है सर? केस ऑफ ग्रेड वाली आप केस ऑफ भी यूज कर सकते हैं, आप ये भी कर सकते हैं. बोथ ऑफ देम आर परफेक्टली फाइन, डजंट मेक एनी डिफरेंस. सही है, आप दोनों यूज कर सकते हैं. इट डज नॉट मेक एनी डिफरेंस. बट व्हेन यू मेक यूज ऑफ इफ स्टेटमेंट, देयर इज अ रीजन व्हाई यू शुड बी मेकिंग यूज ऑफ इफ स्टेटमेंट अप हियर. व्हाई? क्योंकि मैं अभी आपको बता दूं. इफ लेट्स से योर मार्क्स आर ग्रेटर देन द डिस्टिंक्शन वैल्यू, इफ लेट्स से दे आर, in that case you need to do two things. The first thing is you need to increment the number of students who got distinction. So जो हमने पीछे एक variable बनाया था distinction number का, you need to increase the value of that. So distinction number is now going to have the value of distinction number plus 1. Distinction NO plus 1. And at the same time, you also need to output the grade. Output grade, and you might write distinction. But if you make use of case statement, तो case statement में usually one statement is being executed. So for that reason, it's better कि आप यहाँ पे if statement use करें. So what if I don't declare anything? So if the question does not ask you to declare anything, फिर तो कोई मसला नहीं है. But if the question asks you to declare something, फिर you will be losing marks. So yeah, just like that, okay, हमने distinction कर दिया. But if let's say the marks are not greater than distinction, this basically means the marks are less than 70, right? They are less than 70. Otherwise, to distinction मिल जाती. So if it's less than distinction, तो उस केस में क्या होगा?
So I will be making use of else statement. Else, if marks are not greater than the distinction value, then definitely I will be making use of another if statement. If my average marks at this point, average marks of the student counter, if at this point the marks for this student is basically greater than the merit position which we declared, in that case again do the same thing then, and in then you might write merit number जो हमने एक variable बनाया था, increment that by 1 so that your merit number becomes whatever the value inside it is, उसको एक ज़्यादा कर देना, and at the same time just output it for that student that okay bro, your grade is merit, output grade merit. Just like that you will be like okay, else if even that's not true, so it will be like okay, else if average marks are sort of for that student counter is greater than pass. If it's still greater than pass, then आप बस ये कर दो then, and inside then you might just do something like pass number, and you increment that pass number by 1, pass and o plus 1, and you do output grade pass. Otherwise, if even that's not the case, so definitely you fail, right? If it's even less than the pass one, then in that case you fail. So you can just write else, and in else you can do fail number incremented by 1. So you can do fail number plus 1, and definitely you could do something like output grade failed, and boom, you sort of did it for one student. Now you did it for one student. Now this whole logic has been working under this for loop, which means कि हमने ये सारा का सारा कुछ for student counter position number 1 किया. Now I want you to do it for student number 2, which means now if I want to go to position number 2, at the very end up here I'll write next student counter. So the same logic will be then implemented for the entire student number 2, and will continue for student number 3, 4, 5 until it goes till the class size. So he can calculate how many exactly. तो जब हम ये 1 by sir, why are we incrementing by 1? Because आपको question के अंदर इन्होंने बोला है कि आपने हमें बताना है at the end कि how many students got distinction, how many students got merits, and how many of them are failed. So जब भी किसी student के greater than pass marks आएंगे, so this means the student pass. So I'd be like, okay, let's increase कि कितने बच्चे pass हुए. So I'm sort of finding the counting part of it, and definitely once I do it for one student, I want this whole thing to be repeated for the other students too. But once everything is being done, हमें लग रहा है कि everything is done, but at the end it says that you also need to output it the total number of students who got distinctions, merit, passes, and fails. So this code till this point will basically calculate the total marks for all the students to average marks for all the students. It's going to output the grades for all the students, and it's going to calculate how many merits we have, how many passes we have, how many distinctions we have. But once this whole thing happens, I at the end will be now outputting the counts. So I'll be like, okay, counts of the grades as a comment, and now I will be just output statement. So I can do something like output distinction no, and in distinction no, I can, in front of that I can add a comma, and I can do distinction number, whatever the variable name is, distinction no, right? Then I can do output merits, तो वो भी हम कर सकते हैं quotation and merit no. Just like that, output, I might want to do pass, how many students passed the exam, so comma, pass no. And finally, I might want to do how many of them failed, so output failed, and I can do something like fail no. And what this will do is that once it has calculated the total number of distinction, because how this code is going to work, ये एक student के लिए पहले marks calculate करेगा, उसके total marks find करेगा, उसके एवरेज मार्क्स फाइंड करेगा, एंड सबके सब करने के बाद वो देखेगा कि ओके एक स्टूडेंट के लिए हमने लेट्स से द स्टूडेंट स्कोर्ड ग्रेटर देन 70, तो डिस्टिंक्शन नंबर 1 बढ़ गया, बट देन इट गोज टू द नेक्स्ट स्टूडेंट, सो इट गोज टू स्टूडेंट नंबर 2, वो सेम टू सेम चीजें स्टूडेंट नंबर 2 के लिए इंप्लीमेंट करेगा, एंड देन इट्स गोना सी लेट्स से दैट स्टूडेंट नंबर 2 गॉट लाइक लेट्स से पास, तो पास नंबर इंक्रीमेंट करेगा, एंड सो ऑन, ये सारी की सारी क्लास के लिए मार्क्स कैलकुलेट करेगा, एंड वंस इट्स बीइंग डन, व्हेन यू एग्जिट दिस लूप, इट्स सॉर्ट ऑफ हैव द वैल्यू ऑफ द एंटायर क्लास, एंड फिर आपने एंड में बस कर देना आउटपुट, एंड बूम,
You have met these four criteria, and this will get you a perfect 15 by 15. Now, before ending it and कुछ और चीजें बताने की, सर हम आउटपुट मेरिट या डिस्टिंक्शन कर सकते हैं, तो 70 या 55 भी आउटपुट हो सकते हैं क्या? किस तरीके से सिलाई, सर हम आउटपुट मेरिट या डिस्टिंक्शन कर रहे हैं तो 70 या 55 भी आउटपुट हो सकते? नहीं 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 नहीं, यहाँ पे तो हम डिस्टिंक्शन नंबर को आउटपुट करें ना. You see, we are not outputting the constant. We are like, okay, distinction number को print करो. What is distinction number? जो हम count करेंगे, let's say अगर किसी बच्चे के distinction आई है, तो हमने एक variable बनाया which is storing कि इस बच्चे की distinction आई है, right? तो वो जो count of that student है, उसको हमने distinction number के अंदर store किया, उसको हम फिर eventually यहाँ distinction number वाले जो हमने अलग से एक integer बनाया, इसको हम यहाँ पे end में print करें कि यार इतने बच्चों की distinction आई है. Don't be right and end if at end perfect. Thank you for explaining, telling me. ये बिल्कुल आपने सही बोला. You need to write an end if, but now this was what I tried to explain in that syntax point. If you miss this end if, it won't cost you any marks. Why? Because this is a minor syntax error. Again, you should be not missing it out though. It does not have any marks, by the way, but it's better. So if you don't miss it, good to go. But agar miss kar diya, so no need to panic. It's not like you will be losing marks on this. I remember in my 15 marker back when I was solving it, मैंने case statement use की थी and I forgot using the otherwise and end case वाली logic. मैं वो लिखना ही भूल गया. And I was very, very panicked. मैंने कहा marks कटेंगे, but नहीं होते. Yeah, I still got a distinction, right? So this meant कि it was good to go see. But if you sort of don't do it on your own and मसला हो गया, तो फिर उस केस के अंदर मसला हो गया. Sir, was easy. देखो, it is easy to understand. थोड़ा 2D arrays अगर आप लोग नहीं familiar, I would expect or perhaps tell you guys कि आप जाके पहले 2D arrays के concept को recall करो, because without that it's not possible. What's a distinction? Distinction is basically an award from Cambridge, which is sort of given to you when you score the highest in a country or maybe in your region. Sir, iska difficulty level kya tha as compared to other 15 markers? So this was comparatively maybe okayish level 15 marker, easy to okayish level, but एक दो इस तरह हैं जो कि बहुत चैलेंजिंग है, which we will be doing inshallah in the past paper session. But don't worry, वो फिर ये कि if a difficult question comes up तो उसका threshold होता है. So either way you're good to go. Your task is to maximize your marks. And now the point here to understand before ending the class is कि now you don't get 15 by 15 for all of this. इसके अंदर if I break the 15 marker, the 15 marker 9 marks are for logic and 6 marks are for commenting and all that part. So because my code is logical, it had everything perfectly. मुझे 9 by marks इसलिए मिल रहे. And 6 marks मुझे क्यों मिले? Because I had comments in the code, I had variable names as meaningful identifiers, right? I had meaning to it. So like I did not just randomly created something like for count, for counter. Perhaps I did for subject counter, for student counter, which explains the meaning of it. I did not create random variables like XYZ. I said like pass number, fail number. So ये सारे के सारे इसके marks, and definitely I did everything in a specific order, right? So if you see, it does make sense. इस तरह नहीं है कि कोई चीज ऊपर हो रही है, कोई चीज नीचे हो रही है. It's being following a specific order because everything is being following the perfect manner. I say that you get a perfect 6 by 6 for this, 9 by 9 for this, and boom, you get a perfect 15 by 15 for writing this code. And that is how you basically solve this whole thing. Sir, अगर दो if statement use की है तो दो end if लिखेंगे. बिल्कुल आपने दो end if ही use करने हैं. When will the past paper session start? It's going to be starting from the 1st of April, inshallah. अच्छा, so finalizing सब एक दफा ऊपर से करते. So first of all, this program asks us to create some variables and arrays. So मैंने वो स्टोर करने के कितने बच्चों के डिस्टिंक्शन आए, मेरिट्स आए, पास हुए, फेल हुए, उनके लिए मैंने arrays बनाए. तो सारी क्लास के मार्क्स स्टोर करने के लिए मैंने टोटल मार्क्स बनाए, उनके टोटल एवरेज स्टोर करने के लिए एवरेज मार्क्स array बनाई. फिर डिस्टिंक्शन कांस्टेंट बनाया, मेरिट कांस्टेंट बनाया, पास मेरिट बनाया, कांस्टेंट बनाया, so that I can rather than using values later on, मैं डायरेक्टली उनके नाम यूज करूँ. Like you see, अब यहाँ पे मुझे वो greater than 70 नहीं लिखना पड़ा. I just wrote the name. Even though अगर आप greater than equal to 70 करो, that's also fine. कोई मसले की बात नहीं है. अब मैंने क्या किया, मैंने कहा कि ओके मैं एक स्टूडेंट को पकड़ूंगा. उस स्टूडेंट के मैंने सारे के सारे पहले टोटल एंड एवरेज फाइंड करनी है. सो फॉर स्टूडेंट नंबर 1 में पहले सब्जेक्ट से लेकर उसके जितने भी सब्जेक्ट्स है, सारे के सारे सब्जेक्ट्स के मार्क्स लूंगा. एंड आई एम गोना ऐड देम ऑल अप, एंड जो भी उसके टोटल मार्क्स है उनको आई एम गोना स्टोर इन अ array name with total marks. Once I've done this and I do it for all the subjects, I sort of have the total marks of that student. Once I have the total marks of all the student, सर स्टूडेंट काउंटर को डिक्लेयर नहीं किया. नो, आपको डिक्लेयर करने की जरूरत नहीं है. रिमेंबर, व्हेनेवर यू राइट समथिंग विद अ फॉर,
this thingy is auto declared. सही है, तो इसको आपको कोई डिक्लेयर करने की जरूरत नहीं है. राइटिंग समथिंग अलोंगसाइड फॉर स्टेटमेंट ऑटोमेटिकली डिक्लेयर्स इट. ये पता नहीं आप लोग को क्यों बार बार बताया जा रहा है कि आपने डिक्लेयर करना है, कोई डिक्लेयर करने की बात नहीं है. सही है सर. असाइनमेंट ऑपरेटर इक्वल्स तो दोनों सेम चीज है. माय टीचर सेड इक्वल्स टू लगाने पे मार्क्स डिडक्ट नहीं होते क्योंकि आपके जनरली सिंटैक्स में कोई इतना बड़ा फर्क नहीं आता. बट अकॉर्डिंग टू द एग्जामिनर गाइडलाइन, अकॉर्डिंग टू द सूडो कोड गाइड, आपने एरो ही लगाना है. अकॉर्डिंग टू द ऑफिशियल, अगर आपने केम्ब्रिज के लॉजिक को फॉलो करना है तो केम्ब्रिज एक्सपेक्ट्स यू टू मेक यूज ऑफ एरो. यू कैन ओपन अप एनी मार्किंग स्कीम. आप मुझे एक मार्किंग स्कीम इस तरह बता दें जहां पे एरो की जगह इक्वल टू यूज हुआ तो मैं आपको बोल दूं. सही है. सो अब आपने यहाँ के इस पॉइंट के अंदर आपने सारे के सारे स्टूडेंट्स के टोटल फाइंड किए एंड देन यू आर लाइक ओके मैंने सबके टोटल फाइंड कर लिया. अब क्योंकि मेरे पास टोटल है आई कैन कैलकुलेट द एवरेज जो कि टोटल बाय नंबर ऑफ सब्जेक्ट होगा. सो मैंने लाइक कहा कि ओके एवरेज मार्क्स के अंदर आपने स्टोर कर दिए जो भी उनके टोटल मार्क्स है डिवाइड बाय जितने सब्जेक्ट्स है. बट बिकॉज उन्होंने बोला था कि आपने राउंड भी करना है तो राउंड करने के दो तरीके. आइदर यू मेक यूज द राउंड फंक्शन और यू कैन डू दिस कि आप उसके अंदर 1.5 ऐड कर दो and make use of int alongside it to basically convert it into a whole number integer. And once done with this, मैंने एक स्टूडेंट के एवरेज मार्क्स भी कर लिए. नाउ आई वांट टू आउटपुट देयर नेम, total marks, average marks. तो वो मैंने आउटपुट कर दिया alongside their respective positions and boom, once I'm done with this, अब मैंने ग्रेड कैलकुलेट करना है. सो उसके लिए मैंने इस कंडीशनल स्टेटमेंट यूज करी कि इफ अगर आपके एवरेज मार्क्स ग्रेटर देन इक्वल टू डिस्टिंक्शन वाले हुए फिर आपने डिस्टिंक्शन नंबर को कर देना. इफ नॉट डेफिनेटली इट्स लेस देन 70. सो अगर इफ इट्स लेस देन 70 एंड इट्स ग्रेटर देन 55 फिर आपने मेरिट नंबर को बता देना कि ओके आई हैव वन न्यू मेरिट नंबर स्टूडेंट. सो आई एम इंक्रीमेंटिंग द वेरिएबल व्हिच इज स्टोरिंग द नंबर ऑफ स्टूडेंट्स हु गॉट मेरिट एंड आई आउटपुट द ग्रेड मेरिट. And likewise, I do it for all the other grades. And once I do it for one student, now I would be like, okay, go on to the next student. So ये जो सारा कुछ हुआ, this was for one student. So I say this was everything for mass. So it's calculated mass grade, mass total marks, mass average, mass का नाम output किया, mass के total marks, average marks and grade output किया. And now you go to the next student. So once you do it for the entire class, अब आपने at the end आपके पास distinction numbers भी store होंगे, merit number भी होंगे, pass number भी होंगे, fail number भी होंगे. So उनको eventually output करने के लिए फिर आपको one by one each of them needs to be outputted this way and boom, once done with this you'll be done with your 15 marker. Is this clear? सर अगर लाइंस के बाहर लिखे तो मार्क्स कटते हैं. लाइंस के बाहर इट्स रिकमेंडेड कि आप इसी लाइन तक ही रहें. अगर नहीं है तो नीचे स्टार्ट कर दे, कोई मसले की बात नहीं है. इट्स नॉट जरूरी कि उसी उसमें होंगे. सही है सर. अगर और इंडेंटेशन क्या होती है? इंडेंटेशन इज दिस गैप व्हिच आई एम बेसिकली लीविंग. सो लाइक एल्स के बाद ये गैप आ गया, ये गैप आ गया. दिस गैप इज व्हाट वी कॉल एज इंडेंटेशन. क्लियर सर? स्टूडेंट काउंटर इंडेक्स को रिप्रेजेंट कर रहे हैं. स्टूडेंट को हाँ बेसिकली यस. एट दिस केस इफ आई एम सेइंग कि मेरे डिटेल्स आउटपुट हो रहे हैं सो आई एम लाइक एट स्टूडेंट पोजीशन नंबर 1 तो वो स्टूडेंट काउंटर पोजीशन नंबर 1 हो गया. ओके आई कैन शेयर दिस, डोंट वरी बॉब. सर टोटल मार्क्स वाली लाइन बता सकते हैं आप? टोटल लाइन मार्क्स वाली जो लाइन है, टोटल मार्क्स वाली ये वाली लाइन, दिस वन, दिस वन, द वन व्हिच आई जस्ट पॉइंटेड विद एन एरो. यार आप मुझे एक बात बताओ, इफ आई वांट टू स्टोर दिस टोटल of 5 values. So if I create a variable total which has the value 0 inside it and I let's say input the value 5, input some number and I want to put this into total, तो मैं कैसे करूँगा? I would be like okay total में आप total plus number करो ना. Why? Because let's say मैं एक दफा ये करूँगा and I might want to make use of for loop for this. For count 1 to 5 let's say if I create a for loop and you input something like 5 तो यहाँ पे आप total में 0 plus 5 करोगे, so this has 5. The next time you take an input it's 10, so आप करोगे क्या? You do 5 in the total plus the new 10 which you entered as an input, so 10 plus 5 is 15. Then you again do something like 10 तो वो 25 हो गया and so on, right? So what you are trying to do is आप वही variable के अंदर जो उसकी previous value है, you take that previous value और उसके साथ आप जो भी new value है उसको add करते हो. So you do total में total plus number. So the same logic is being implemented up here कि आप total एक array है in this case and हम उस array के अंदर जो भी उस array के अंदर previously value है हम वो value लेकर उसके अंदर new value put करेंगे. अब वो जो new value वो है हमारे at this position which is basically जो मेरा 2D array है उसके अंदर whenever I want to access these marks, तो उसको marks को access करने का तरीका यही है कि I would be like, okay, go to the student position which is student counter, and at that counter go to the specific column. So वो जो column होगा, that is my subject counter. So I'd be like, okay, go to student counter and subject counter, which apparently means that if originally I'm looking for student number one, subject number one, तो वो 30 लेगा, वो 30 add हो जाएगा total के अंदर, so total के अंदर 30 आ गया. Then I want to basically go to subject column number two, तो वो 50 पे चला गया. So take the previous value of total, so it's total में total plus the new value of 50. So total previously had 30. So 30 plus 50 is 80, and that's again being stored in total. So if you go back to the code, the same thing is happening. कि आप क्या कर रहे हो? You're sort of taking the previous value of total, उसके अंदर new value जो कि आप access करते हो at this position, वो add up हो रही है, and that is eventually restored again in the total marks array. Clear? Sir, why are we adding subject number total marks वाली line में? Because definitely आप अगर 2D array को देखो, तो 2D अरे में तो आपने एक बच्चे के स्टूडेंट नंबर तो यहाँ पे, बट आपके मल्टीपल सब्जेक्ट्स है, सब्जेक्ट नंबर वन, सब्जेक्ट नंबर टू, सब्जेक्ट नंबर थ्री, तो आपने तो हर एक मार्क्स को ऐड करना है. तो अब आप कैसे करोगे? क्योंकि आपने एक को तो कर दिया, बट आपने स्टूडेंट सब्जेक्ट नंबर टू पे भी जाना है, थ्री पे भी जाना है, तो मुझे क्या पता कि मैं अभी कौन से सब्जेक्ट नंबर को डील कर रहा हूँ. सो उसके लिए आपको सब्जेक्ट नंबर की अरे वेरिएबल को यूज करना ही होगा. क्लियर? टूल वाज अ बिट अनक्लियर एंड द कोड से जो आपने एंड लिखा वो थोड़ा अनक्लियर है. हाउ टू राइट एन अराउंड का भी यूज दिखा दिया. अच्छा सर, आपने टोटल मार्क्स का साइंस यूज नहीं किया. यस जैफा, यू आर करेक्ट. उसके अंदर एक चीज हमने मिस कर दी थी. अब here you also need to, because we created this total marks and the average marks on our own, if you create something on your own, you also need to initialize it. So if you want to initialize this, तो उसके लिए आपको ये करना होगा, you need to create a variable or a loop for count, and उसको आपने 1 से लेकर लेकर जाना है for all the student class. So student counter, जितने भी students हैं, and what you need to do is कि आपके total marks की whatever position is, at that position put the value 0. So total marks count, put the value 0 inside it, and then you can do next count. And the same needs to be done for the average marks too. You do this, and फिर आपके array जो है उसके अंदर 0 value आ गई, क्योंकि if you don't initialize it, आप randomly values उसके अंदर put नहीं कर सकते. Just like that, you have a question कि ये इस line के अंदर क्या हो रहा है. So you should be aware that round function, what round function does is that round function, if you might have some value, let's say value, and you do something like round value 0, what this does is it's going to convert that into a whole form. So if I write this whole thing, this whole line of average marks, and इससे पहले मैं यहाँ पे let's say round लिख दूँ, and I put a 0 next to it in this format, because that is how you make use of the round function. तो आपकी वो value round off हो जाएगी to whole number. And just like that, one other way of rounding off something is by making use of the int variable, int function. You write the whole statement, and within the brackets, after the brackets, you're like just making use of this int keyword. What this int keyword does is it converts any decimal point into whole number. So what I did up here was that this whole logic is basically my average. But this average could be in decimal point too. This could be in decimal point. So what I do is कि जो भी values के अंदर 0.5 add कर दूं ताकि वो एक बड़ी value बन जाए. So it's like 32.1, उसको मैं 32.6 बना दिया. So that if I round it up to a 33 बन जाए. Let's say I'm rounding it up in this case. So मैंने इसलिए 0.5 add किया, and then I want to convert this 32.6 into 33. तो उसके लिए मैं क्या करूंगा, इस सब के सबको ब्रैकेट्स के अंदर एंड बाहर में int basically converts this 32.6 into a whole form 33. Okay. Clear now? In nested loops, which loops run first, inner or outer? In nested loops अगर आप देखो तो nested loops के अंदर first of all definitely आपके subject का loop चल रहा है, this inner one, and फिर आपका outer. तो पहले ये सारे subjects के लिए कर रहा है, and फिर वो अगले student के लिए कर रहा है. सर क्वेश्चन में तो लिखा है कि इनिशियलाइज नहीं करना. क्वेश्चन में लिखा है इनिशियलाइज नहीं करना फॉर दोज व्हिच हैव बीन डिक्लेयर्ड बिफोर एंड. यू सी, यू डोंट नीड टू ओके आई डोंट नो इंटरनेट का कोई हो गया था या गाइस सॉरी 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 क्या वो इंटरनेट इशू हो गया था इंटरनेट इशू हो गया था जस्ट अ मिनट can you guys hear me now yeah I know there was some internet issue इस वजह से हो गया था but yeah guys can you hear me now very good. So I don't know, there was some internet issue, but yes, because the question says कि आपने initialize नहीं करना, तो in that case it's not necessary कि आप initialize करो. इसके बगैर भी easy scene हो जाएगा. सर व्हाई डिडंट यू टेक एनी इनपुट्स क्योंकि भाई इन्होंने खुद ही बोल दिया कि आपकी डेटा इन द अरे फील्ड है तो आपको इनपुट लेने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है. सर इफ टू स्टूडेंट्स हैव द सेम नेम्स फिर क्या होगा कोई मसले की बात नहीं है तो आपने दो स्टूडेंट्स के डेटा आउटपुट कर दिया. अब स्टूडेंट नंबर पोजीशन नंबर 1 पे मार्क्स स्टोर्ड हो एंड पोजीशन नंबर 4 पे भी मार्क्स स्टोर्ड हो तो कोई फर्क नहीं है बट उनके मार्क्स तो डिफरेंट होंगे. एंड अगर सेम भी हुए तो क्या हुआ बस आपने उसमें बता दिया कि स्टूडेंट नेम माज नंबर 2 अब माज मुनीर होगा तो दूसरा माज अहमद होगा सो माज अहमद हैज दिस नेम और अगर माज मुनीर दो दफा आया स्टिल नो प्रॉब्लम एक दफा पहले आउटपुट हो जाएगा माज मुनीर एवरेज मार्क्स 80 टोटल ग्रेड दिस देन माज मुनीर अगेन एवरेज मार्क्स 70 टोटल ग्रेड बी सो उससे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता सही है. So this basically was 115 marker which I tried solving. एक तो आज आप लोगों ने क्लास के अंदर शोर शुरू में काफी ज्यादा किया था ड्यू टू विच इट वाज समथिंग जो कि समझ शुरू में नहीं आई होगी बट आई होप दिस इज समवट ऑफ क्लियर. द क्लास वाज प्रीटी गुड but I hope it was sort of explained really well. Sir, I didn't understand for the student counterpart, like how many students are you choosing? Because it can be 10, 20, or 100, and the total will be different. Okay, I get your point. Now, the thing is, Amor, that when we are unaware कि कितने students होंगे, how many students there are in a specific class, in that case, what we need to do is there will be a variable which will be storing the total number of students. So we need to make the use of the loop from the very first element to whatever the value in the total in the variable of student counter is. So let's say the student counter stores the value 50. So this loop will run from 1 to 50. If the student counter had the variable 100, so it will going to be go from 1 to 100. If it had the value 10, so it's going to go from 1 to 10. So it's not up to you to define whether it needs to go from 10, 20, 100. It's basically going to run from the very first position to whatever the value in student counter is. So the student count basically does not run on our own. Perhaps it runs from the very first position to whatever the class size is. So if the class size is 20, it's going to go till 20. If it's 30, it's going to go till 30. If it's 100, it's going to go till 100. So it's sort of going one by one to whatever the size of class size is. Say, is it clear now? So when calculating the error, should we round it first and then compare with grade boundaries or compare the exact value? नहीं, पहले आप calculate the average, round it up, and then after that compare it with the grade boundaries. Perfect. So if there are any other questions, आप वो पूछ सकते हो. Lag भी गिर गया था, but never mind. If not, then I guess this is it for today. I hope you all had a good session and कुछ सीखने को मिल गया. Um, if you guys have any other questions, you can share and ask that in our community group chat. Otherwise, that is it for today. See you guys, inshallah, some other day in the group. Take care, everybody. I hope it was helpful for all those who might be interested in joining our past paper sessions. You can ask for the details in the group. The recording will be uploaded, and I hope it was a healthy experience for you all. मेरी तो बस होगी because I had one class before and 2 of 1 hour, and उसके अंदर मैं पहले से ही थक गया था और ऊपर से 2 घंटे आप लोग की गप्पे नहीं रुक रही थी but कोई नहीं. I hope it was helpful for you all. Inshallah, see you guys some other day and see you guys perhaps in the past paper session. That's going to be a boom sort of session क्योंकि उसके अंदर we won't be having the students जो कि शुगर वगैरह के लिए आते. I know definitely a lot of the students up here were just to disrupt the entire scene, and in these online classes, free online classes, we are unable to basically remove them. But for the past paper session, definitely everyone who will be registered are be there and will be there for the purpose of learning. So for that reason, if you are willing to lock in the right way and you want to learn it the best way, so join the past paper session. Inshallah, see you guys in the class. The demo classes for the past paper session will be starting soon. That's great to know, Amor. But that is everything for today, inshallah. See you guys some other day. Take care, everybody. Allah Hafiz.